Settle back, dear listener, and let your mind drift to a time long past, when golden sunlight danced across the rolling hills of Anatolia. Picture, if you will, a land where ancient civilizations had once flourished, where the whispers of Byzantine emperors still echoed through marble corridors, and where nomadic horsemen rode beneath endless skies. This is where our story begins, in a realm suspended between dreams and waking, between east and west, where the waters of two seas meet in a gentle embrace. In the 13th century, as autumn leaves fell like scattered coins across the Anatolian plateau, the world was changing. The mighty Seljuk Sultanate, which had once ruled these fertile lands with wisdom and strength, was slowly fading like the last notes of a distant song. The Mongol storms that had swept across Asia were receding, leaving behind a patchwork of small principalities, each seeking its own path forward. Among the rolling green hills and olive groves of northwestern Anatolia, where morning mist clung to ancient valleys, there lived a Turkish tribal leader named Ertuğrul. He was a man of quiet dignity, leading his people with the gentle firmness of a shepherd guiding his flock. When the great Sultan of the Seljuks recognized his loyalty and service, Ertuğrul was granted lands near the town of Söğüt, close to the Byzantine frontier, a place where two worlds touched like the meeting of day and night. Here, beneath the shade of ancient oak trees, Ertuğrul's people gradually settled, transforming from wandering herders into farmers who worked the rich earth. They built simple homes of wood and stone, tended their flocks, and found peace in the rhythm of the seasons. When Ertuğrul passed into eternal rest around 1281, the mantle of leadership fell gently upon the shoulders of his son, a young man whose name would echo through the centuries, Osman. Osman was neither the wealthiest nor the most powerful among the frontier lords, yet he possessed something precious, a vision that stretched beyond the horizon. He understood that true strength came not from the sword alone, but from the bonds of trust and friendship that could unite different peoples. Like a wise gardener who knows that the most beautiful gardens contain flowers of many colors, Osman welcomed skilled craftsmen and learned men from distant lands. He treated those who submitted to his rule with fairness and kindness, understanding that a realm built on fear would crumble like a castle of sand. As the years passed softly by, like pages turning in an ancient book, Osman's small domain began to grow. Local farmers and villagers, weary of harsh taxation and constant uncertainty, found in his rule a gentle stability they had long sought. Christians, Muslims, and those of other faiths discovered they could live peacefully under his protection, each community maintaining its own traditions while contributing to the greater harmony of the whole. The dream that shaped an empire. One night, as silver moonlight streamed through the window of his modest dwelling, Osman experienced a dream that would become legend. In this vision, he saw a magnificent tree growing from his heart, its branches reaching toward the heavens and spreading across the known world. Beneath its protective shade stood great mountains, the Caucasus with their snow-capped peaks, the Atlas ranges of North Africa, the Taurus heights of Anatolia, and the rolling Balkans. From the tree's roots flowed 4 sacred rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates of ancient Mesopotamia, the life-giving Nile, and the blue Danube of Europe. Ships sailed peacefully upon these waters, their white sails catching the gentle breeze. Cities of marble and gold rose along the riverbanks, their minarets and domes reaching toward a sky adorned with the crescent moon. Gardens bloomed with roses and jasmine. Markets bustled with merchants speaking a dozen languages, and scholars gathered in libraries filled with the wisdom of ages. When Osman shared this dream with Sheikh Edebali, a revered holy man whose daughter had captured his heart, the wise mystic smiled with understanding. "Your vision," he said softly, "speaks of a destiny written in the stars, an empire that will embrace many lands and peoples, guided by justice and faith." Whether this dream truly visited Osman's sleep or grew in the telling through generations of storytellers, it became a guiding light for his descendants, a reminder that their purpose was greater than mere conquest. Osman's early achievements were modest but steady, like the patient work of a master craftsman. He secured Byzantine castles and towns around Suud, each victory bringing more warriors to his banner. In 1299, as autumn painted the hillsides in shades of gold and crimson, Osman felt confident enough to declare his independence from the failing Seljuk Sultanate. His followers began calling themselves Osmanlis, the people of Osman, though history would remember them by another name, the Ottomans. The early Ottoman realm was organized like a great family, with each member having their role and responsibility. Warriors who served faithfully received grants of land in newly acquired territories, creating a network of loyalty that stretched across the growing domain. Markets sprouted around frontier fortresses, and a gentle bureaucracy began to take shape, guided by the twin principles of Islamic law and practical necessity. Religious teachers and mystic dervishes played a crucial role in weaving together the diverse threads of this emerging society. Sufi lodges, with their peaceful courtyards and whirling devotions, became centers of learning and spiritual guidance. Here, Turkish nomads, Greek farmers, and converts from many backgrounds found common ground in their shared faith and hope for a better future. As Osman grew older, his son Orhan proved himself a capable leader in his own right, commanding armies with skill and governing with wisdom. Together, father and son methodically expanded their influence throughout northwestern Anatolia, like gardeners carefully tending an ever-growing orchard. Their greatest prize was the prosperous city of Bursa, a jewel of Byzantine civilization that commanded important trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. The siege of Bursa was conducted with patience rather than fury. Ottoman forces surrounded the city like a gentle but persistent tide, cutting off supplies while treating captured enemies with honor. Though Osman directed the early stages of this careful campaign, he would not live to see its completion. In 1323, as winter snow blanketed the Anatolian hills, the founder of what would become one of history's greatest dynasties quietly passed away in his wooden residence at Suud. Orhan completed the conquest of Bursa in 1326, making it the first true capital of the Ottoman state. According to cherished legend, he brought news of the city's surrender to his father's tomb, fulfilling Osman's final wish. The modest principality that one man had carved from courage, wisdom, and dreams had become something greater, a beacon of hope and stability in a world of constant change. The flowering of a dynasty. In the green hills surrounding Bursa, where sacred tombs were marked by cypress trees and rising mosques added their voices to the dawn chorus of birds, the Ottoman state found its first true home. From Osman's dream-inspired beginning, his descendants would build a power that would endure for 6 centuries, each generation adding new chapters to a story that seemed touched by destiny itself. As the green banner of the Ottomans fluttered peacefully over Bursa's minarets, the dynasty stood at the threshold of a new age. Under Orhan's wise leadership, which would span 36 years from 1326 to 1362, the modest principality began its transformation from a frontier domain into a sophisticated state that would one day bridge 2 continents. Orhan inherited more than territory from his father. He carried forward Osman's political wisdom and talent for building lasting institutions. Establishing his court in conquered Bursa, he set about transforming the Ottoman realm from a loose confederation of Turkish warriors into an organized state. The conquest had brought both wealth and new challenges, as the Ottomans now ruled over substantial Christian populations who required more sophisticated governance than simple frontier administration could provide. Orhan's innovations reflected both practical necessity and grand ambition. He commissioned the minting of the first Ottoman coins, beautiful silver pieces that bore witness to the dynasty's growing sovereignty. In Bursa, he established a chancellery that adapted the finest administrative practices from Persian and Byzantine traditions. Ancient churches were respectfully converted to mosques, while magnificent new religious complexes rose from the earth, their graceful domes and slender minarets announcing the arrival of a dynasty with imperial dreams. The most famous of these was the Green Mosque, its emerald tiles catching the morning light like jewels scattered across marble. This architectural masterpiece, which still stands today as a testament to Ottoman artistic vision, represented more than mere building. It was a declaration that this frontier state had come of age, ready to take its place among the great powers of the world. While transforming the structures of governance, Orhan also revolutionized the Ottoman military system. The Ghazi cavalry remained important, their courage and mobility still essential for expansion, but Orhan recognized the growing importance of infantry forces capable of conducting sieges and holding territory. Around 1330, he created the Yaya Corps, paid Turkish foot soldiers who served as the first regular Ottoman military unit. More significantly, he laid the groundwork for what would become the legendary Janissary Corps, an elite force that would serve as the backbone of Ottoman military might for centuries. This innovative system involved the periodic recruitment of Christian boys from rural areas who were converted to Islam and subjected to rigorous training. These young men became the Sultan's personal troops, owing loyalty to no one but him. What might seem unusual to modern eyes was often viewed as an opportunity by families of that era. Many willingly gave their sons to this system, knowing it offered a path to power and influence otherwise unattainable. The brightest of these recruits might rise to become governors, generals, or even grand viziers, the highest officials in the empire. This merit-based advancement created a ruling class bound not by birth or tribal connections, but by talent and loyalty to the Ottoman state. The bridge to Europe. while Orhan consolidated his Anatolian holdings with the patience of a master builder, he kept a watchful eye on developments across the narrow waters of the Dardanelles. The Byzantine Empire, though weakened by centuries of conflict and internal strife, still held Constantinople and significant territories in the Balkans. But Byzantine politics had become a complex web of rivalries and civil wars, creating opportunities for those wise enough to see them. In 1346, Emperor John VI Kantakouzenos, locked in struggle with rival claimants to the throne, made a decision that would change the course of history. Seeking military assistance from the Ottomans, he offered Orhan the hand of his daughter Theodora in marriage. This Byzantine invitation provided the opportunity the Ottomans had long awaited, a legitimate entry into European affairs. When an earthquake damaged the walls of several Byzantine fortresses along the Dardanelles in 1354, Orhan's son Suleiman Pasha seized the moment with the swiftness of a hawk. His forces captured the fortress of Simp and then the strategic city of Gallipoli, establishing the first permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe. Like a bridge spanning two worlds, this beachhead would become the launching point for the conquest of the Balkans. Though Suleiman did not live to build upon his achievement, passing away in a hunting accident shortly afterward, the process he had begun continued under his brother Murad, who succeeded Orhan in 1362. During his 27-year reign, Murad IV transformed the Ottoman state from a regional power into an empire spanning two continents, his vision extending like the branches of Osman's prophetic tree. Murad pursued expansion in both Europe and Anatolia with the strategic mind of a chess master, always thinking several moves ahead. In Europe, Ottoman forces advanced steadily through Thrace, capturing the important city of Adrianople, which the Turks called Edirne, in 1369. Impressed by its strategic location at the crossroads of major trade routes, Murad made Edirne his new capital, symbolically shifting the Ottoman center of gravity toward Europe. From this new base, nestled in the rolling hills of Thrace, where rivers meandered through fertile valleys, Ottoman armies pushed into Bulgaria, Serbia, and Macedonia. The advance was methodical rather than reckless, each gain consolidated before the next move was made. Local populations often found Ottoman rule preferable to the heavy taxation and constant warfare that had characterized the previous decades of Byzantine and Balkan politics. The field of blackbirds. The Ottoman advance naturally alarmed the Christian states of the Balkans, who formed a coalition under the leadership of Prince Lazar of Serbia. On June 15, 1389, the two forces met at Kosovo Field, known locally as Kosovo Polja, the Field of Blackbirds, in what would become one of history's most legendary encounters. The details of this clash have been woven through with centuries of poetry and myth, but the essential facts remain clear. Both Murad and Lazar perished in the fighting, Murad killed by a Serbian nobleman who had feigned surrender, and Lazar captured and executed after the battle. Though costly in blood and leadership, Kosovo was an Ottoman victory that shattered organized Christian resistance in the Balkans for generations. Murad's son Bayazid, who had commanded one wing of the Ottoman army, took charge on the battlefield with decisive authority. Following Ottoman custom designed to prevent civil wars, he ordered the execution of his brother, establishing a precedent that would shape dynastic succession for centuries to come. This harsh practice, while tragic in human terms, ensured that the empire would not be torn apart by competing claims to the throne. For 13 years, from 1389 to 1402, Bayazid the Fern, nicknamed Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for his lightning-quick military campaigns, accelerated Ottoman expansion at a pace that amazed contemporaries. In the Balkans, he reduced Serbia and Bulgaria to vassal states and pushed into Wallachia and Bosnia. When a crusading army, led by King Sigismund of Hungary and filled with French and German knights, marched to reclaim the Balkans for Christendom, Bayazid met them at Nicopolis in 1396 and achieved a stunning victory that echoed throughout Europe. In Anatolia, Bayazid departed from the cautious approach of his predecessors, launching a systematic campaign to absorb the other Turkish principalities. By 1390, the Ottomans controlled most of western and central Anatolia, bringing them into direct conflict with the rising power of Timur, known in the west as Tamerlane, whose vast empire stretched from India to the Mediterranean. Bayazid's rapid conquests were matched by significant internal development. He strengthened central authority, expanded the Ottoman bureaucracy, and promoted Islamic institutions throughout the empire. New madrasas were established, their peaceful courtyards becoming centers of learning where scholars debated philosophy, astronomy, and jurisprudence. Bayazid also began developing naval capabilities, recognizing that control of the seas would be essential for an empire straddling multiple coastlines. The test of fire. However, Bayazid's ambitions soon exceeded even his considerable abilities. While besieging Constantinople, a goal that had eluded his predecessors, he received troubling news that Timur's vast army was advancing into Anatolia. The Central Asian conqueror, who claimed descent from Genghis Khan, had been provoked by Bayazid's absorption of Turkish vassals who had previously acknowledged Timur's overlordship. The two empires collided at Ankara on July 20th, 1402, in a battle that would test the very foundations of Ottoman power. Despite commanding a formidable force, Bayazid found himself facing superior numbers and tactics. When Turkish contingents in his army, resentful of Ottoman centralization policies, defected to Timur during the heat of battle, the encounter turned into a devastating defeat. Bayazid himself was captured and, according to various accounts, spent his final year as Timur's prisoner, passing away in 1403. The Battle of Ankara nearly destroyed the Ottoman state entirely. Timur reinstated the Turkish principalities that Bayazid had conquered, divided Ottoman Anatolia among Bayazid's surviving sons, and established his own candidate as ruler in the European territories. After Timur's departure from Anatolia, the Ottoman realm descended into a period known as the Interregnum, lasting from 1402 to 1413. This was a time of great uncertainty, as Bayazid's sons fought among themselves for supremacy, while external enemies pressed on all fronts. The empire that had seemed destined for greatness suddenly faced the very real possibility of dissolution. From this chaos emerged Mehmed I, one of Bayazid's sons, who gradually prevailed in the fratricidal struggle through a combination of military skill and political acumen. With patience and determination, he reasserted Ottoman control over both Anatolian and European territories. Though forced to accept the independence of some principalities, and acknowledged Timur's successor's overlordship over parts of Anatolia. By his death in 1421, Mehmed had stabilized the Ottoman state and laid the groundwork for renewed expansion. His son, Murad II, inherited a recovered but still vulnerable empire. Throughout his 3 decades at the helm from 1421 to 1451, Murad fought tirelessly to secure Ottoman borders, reassert authority over vassal states, and rebuild Ottoman institutions. In Europe, he faced determined resistance from John Hunyadi of Hungary and Skanderbeg of Albania, while in Anatolia, he gradually reabsorbed the independent principalities. Though less celebrated than his predecessors or successors, Murad's patient consolidation was crucial for Ottoman recovery. He understood that empires, like gardens, require careful tending, that lasting strength comes not from dramatic gestures, but from steady, thoughtful work that builds solid foundations for the future. The young sultan's dream. In 1451, Murad died peacefully and was succeeded by his 19-year-old son, Mehmed II. The young sultan had already demonstrated both intelligence and determination during 2 brief periods when his father had temporarily retired from active rule. Now, with full power in his hands, Mehmed turned his attention to the prize that had eluded his ancestors. Constantinople, the ancient city that stood as both the symbolic heart of Eastern Christianity and the most strategically valuable location in the region. What Bayazid had attempted through haste, Mehmed would achieve through careful preparation. He understood that success required not just courage and determination, but meticulous planning and innovative thinking. The stage was set for the conquest that would transform the Ottoman state into a true empire and change the course of world history. The city stood as it had for over a millennium, its massive walls rising majestically above the waters where Europe and Asia nearly touch. Constantinople, ancient Byzantium, had withstood countless sieges throughout its long and storied history. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE as the eastern capital of the Roman Empire, it had endured when Rome itself had fallen to barbarian invaders. Through wars and plagues, crusades and civil strife, the Queen of Cities had survived, guarding the treasures of classical civilization within its libraries and churches. But now, in the spring of 1453, Constantinople faced its greatest challenge. The last emperor of Byzantium, Constantine XI, Palaiologos, commanded a force of barely 7,000 defenders to hold walls that stretched for miles. His empire, once spanning 3 continents and commanding the respect of the world, had shrunk to little more than the city itself and a few scattered outposts. Outside those ancient walls waited an army more numerous, more determined, and better equipped than any that had come before. Mehmed II possessed not only military might, but also a fierce intelligence and iron will that marked him as a leader of exceptional ability. From the moment he ascended the throne, he had made his intentions clear. What his ancestors had tried to achieve through many campaigns, he would accomplish in a single, decisive stroke. The throat cutter. Mehmed's preparations for the siege were impressive in their scope and thoroughness. In 1452, he ordered the construction of a massive fortress called Rumeli Hisara on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from the older Anatolian fortress of Anadolu Hizara. Together, these strongholds created what Mehmed called the throat cutter, a naval blockade that could control all shipping through the strait. When a Venetian vessel attempted to defy this blockade, its fate served as a clear message to any who might consider challenging Ottoman control. The captain and crew found themselves subject to the harsh justice of war, demonstrating that Mehmed's determination was absolute. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine watched these developments with growing concern. He sent desperate appeals for help to Western Europe, even agreeing to the union of the Orthodox and Catholic churches, a deeply unpopular move among his subjects, who remembered how Catholic crusaders had sacked their city in 1204. But the response from the West was disappointingly meager, reflecting the complex web of European politics and the growing recognition of Ottoman power. In the end, only a few hundred professional soldiers arrived from Genoa and Venice, along with a brilliant Genoese engineer named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who took charge of strengthening the city's defenses. These brave men, far from their homes, would stand with the Byzantines in their final hour, united by faith and the warrior's code of honor. The Ottoman preparations were remarkable for their innovation as well as their scale. Mehmed assembled an army of approximately 80,000 men, including elite Janissary infantry, Anatolian Turkish cavalry, and auxiliaries from his European vassals. To overcome Constantinople's legendary walls, he commissioned a Hungarian cannon founder named Orban to create siege artillery of unprecedented power. When the Byzantines had been unable to meet Orban's salary demands, the engineer had offered his services to Mehmed instead, a decision that would prove fateful. The result was a monster cannon that could fire stone balls weighing up to 1,500 pounds, so large that it required 60 oxen to move, and so powerful that its blast could be heard for miles. This basilica cannon was accompanied by dozens of smaller but still formidable guns. Never before had such artillery been deployed against medieval fortifications designed for an earlier age of warfare. The sound of these great guns, echoing across the waters of the Golden Horn and the Bosphorus, announced that a new era of military technology had arrived. The final siege. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman army took position before Constantinople's walls, and Mehmed sent his first and only offer to Constantine: surrender in exchange for the emperor's life and his people's safety. Constantine's reply was dignified but firm. He would not yield the city that had been entrusted to his care by God and his ancestors. The siege began the following day, but it proceeded with a methodical precision that reflected Mehmed's strategic mind. For weeks, Ottoman cannons hammered the walls, particularly targeting the vulnerable land walls of the Theodosian section. Each night, Byzantine engineers worked desperately to repair the damage, filling breaches with stones, wood, earth, and anything else they could find. Several Ottoman attempts to storm these weakened sections were repulsed with heavy losses, as the defenders fought with the courage born of desperation and faith. Mehmed, facing unexpectedly stubborn resistance, recognized that he needed to complete his encirclement of the city by breaking the harbor chain that protected the Golden Horn. In one of history's most audacious military maneuvers, he ordered his engineers to build a wooden track coated with animal fat across the peninsula of Galata. In a single night, dozens of Ottoman ships were hauled overland from the Bosphorus and lowered into the Golden Horn behind the protective chain. When dawn broke on April 22nd, the Byzantine defenders were amazed to see Ottoman vessels in waters they had thought secure. Despite this setback, the defense continued with undiminished determination. A daring night attack by the Byzantines to burn the Ottoman ships in the Golden Horn failed, though it demonstrated the courage of men who knew they were fighting for more than mere territory. They were defending a civilization, a way of life that stretched back over 1,000 years. The fall of an empire. As May progressed and the walls suffered under constant bombardment, both sides recognized that time favored the attackers. The Byzantines were running short of men, supplies, and hope. By late May, the walls had been significantly weakened, and Mehmed called a council of war to announce his intention to launch a final, all-out assault. Before the attack, he addressed his troops with words that stirred their hearts and reminded them of their duty. He promised them the traditional 3 days of plunder that military law permitted after a conquest, while arranging his forces to ensure healthy competition among different units. This wasn't mere greed. It was the time-honored system by which armies sustained themselves in an age before regular pay and supply lines. Inside Constantinople, Constantine XI gathered his commanders for a final council. Knowing what the next day would bring, the last Byzantine emperor spoke movingly of the city's legacy and the duty they all shared to defend their faith and their people. Then he toured the walls one final time, encouraging his exhausted men with words of hope and honor before returning to the great church of Hagia Sophia for a final prayer service. In that magnificent cathedral, with its soaring dome and shimmering mosaics, Orthodox and Catholic clergy set aside their differences in this desperate hour, praying together for divine intervention. The service was attended by Greeks, Genoese, Catalans, and others who had found themselves united in defense of the city, creating a moment of profound unity amid the darkness of impending doom. The final assault began in the early morning hours of May 29th, 1453. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops advanced against the walls, each attack more determined than the last. The first assault by irregular troops was repulsed, as was a second attack by Anatolian soldiers. Then came the Janissaries, disciplined, trained to perfection, and utterly devoted to their sultan's cause. Near the gate of St. Romanos, where the walls had suffered the most damage from weeks of cannon fire, they focused their attack with the precision of a master craftsman. In the midst of this desperate fighting, Giovanni Giustiniani was severely wounded. As the Genoese commander was carried from the walls, confusion spread among the defenders like ripples across a pond. In the chaos that followed, a small postern gate was left unguarded during the evacuation, and some Ottoman troops discovered this undefended entrance. Almost simultaneously, a group of Janissaries managed to scale the walls near another section. As Ottoman flags appeared on the battlements, resistance collapsed in many areas, and the reality of defeat became undeniable. Emperor Constantine, seeing that the city was lost, reportedly cast off his imperial insignia and led a final charge against the invaders, choosing to die as a soldier rather than live as a captive. His body was never officially identified, though Mehmed later provided a respectful burial for remains believed to be his, honoring a worthy opponent who had fought with courage to the very end. The Transformation. By midday on May 29, 1453, the Ottoman conquest was complete. Mehmed entered the fallen city on horseback, proceeding directly to Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral that had served as the spiritual heart of Eastern Christianity for nearly 1,000 years. When he found a soldier attempting to break up the marble floor for treasure, he stopped him immediately, declaring, "Be satisfied with the booty and captives. The buildings of the city belong to me." The Sultan then ordered the great church converted into a mosque, symbolizing the Ottoman victory, while preserving the magnificent structure for future generations. True to the customs of war, 3 days of sanctioned plunder followed, during which soldiers claimed their traditional rewards. Yet Mehmed's ultimate vision was not destruction, but transformation, and once this period ended, he set about rebuilding Constantinople as the new Ottoman capital. The Sultan took immediate measures to repopulate his prize, inviting former residents to return and bringing in Muslims, Christians, and Jews from throughout his domains. He appointed a new Orthodox patriarch, Gennadios Scholarios, guaranteeing the survival of the church under Ottoman rule. Tax incentives encouraged commerce, and ambitious construction projects began to transform the skyline with Ottoman architectural elements. The city gradually became known by its Turkish name, Istanbul, though both names would be used for centuries. This linguistic transition reflected a deeper transformation. The ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire was becoming the vibrant heart of the Ottoman realm, a cosmopolitan center where East and West would meet in magnificent synthesis. The Golden Age begins. The conquest of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Europe while simultaneously causing celebration throughout the Islamic world. For the Ottomans, this triumph marked a watershed moment, no longer a frontier principality or even a regional power. The Ottoman state had transformed into an empire with a cosmopolitan capital straddling Europe and Asia. Mehmed himself adopted the title Caesar among his many honorifics, positioning himself as the legitimate successor to the Roman emperors. The young sultan, who had gambled everything on this conquest, would go on to earn his title, the Conqueror, many times over, adding territories in the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Black Sea region to his expanding domains. In the decades following Constantinople's conquest, the Ottoman Empire entered what historians would later call its Golden Age. From the mid-15th through the 16th century, a series of exceptional sultans expanded Ottoman territories, developed sophisticated institutions of governance, and fostered a remarkable flowering of culture and the arts. Mehmed II, flush with his triumph at Constantinople, continued his campaigns of expansion until his death in 1481. He subdued the remaining Byzantine outposts in the Black Sea region, conquered Serbia, and pushed deep into Greece and Albania. When the Venetians challenged Ottoman naval power in the Aegean, he built a fleet that wrested much of the sea from their control. In Anatolia, he finally eliminated the independent Turkish principalities that had emerged during the Interregnum, creating a unified Turkish state for the first time since the Seljuk era. By the time of his death, Mehmed had more than doubled Ottoman territories, creating an empire that stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates. The conqueror's contributions extended far beyond military expansion. He reorganized the Ottoman state along more centralized lines, creating a sophisticated administrative system that drew upon Byzantine, Islamic, and Turkish traditions. His law code, the Kanuname, systematized Ottoman governance, establishing clear hierarchies and regulations that would guide the empire for generations. Mehmed also proved himself a patron of arts and learning on a scale that rivaled the Italian Renaissance. He rebuilt Constantinople as a magnificent capital, constructing the vast Topkapi Palace complex as the new center of Ottoman power. This sprawling palace, with its peaceful courtyards, elegant pavilions, and stunning views over the Bosphorus, became a symbol of Ottoman refinement and sophistication. The Consolidator and the Conqueror. After Mehmed's death, his son Bayazid II ascended to the throne following a brief succession struggle. Where his father had been a warrior sultan constantly on campaign, Bayazid was more contemplative, focusing on consolidation rather than expansion. Throughout his three-decade tenure from 1481 to 1512, he oversaw a period of relative peace and internal development. Bayezid strengthened Ottoman naval power, building a fleet that could challenge European maritime states across the Mediterranean. He extended welcome to thousands of Jews expelled from Spain after 1492, enriching Ottoman society with their skills in medicine, commerce, and craftsmanship. These Sephardic Jews would become an integral part of Ottoman civilization, contributing to its cosmopolitan character while maintaining their own rich traditions. The Sultan himself was a mystic with Sufi leanings, patronizing religious foundations and scholarly works. Under his reign, Ottoman poetry and literature flourished, as court poets explored themes of divine love and spiritual enlightenment. The empire's cities grew more prosperous and beautiful, adorned with new mosques, bathhouses, and public fountains that provided fresh water to rich and poor alike. As Bayezid aged, his sons began competing for succession in the traditional Ottoman manner. His energetic son Selim, serving as governor of Trabzon on the Black Sea coast, grew impatient with his father's cautious policies, particularly regarding the rising threat of Safavid Persia to the east. In 1512, supported by the Janissaries who favored a more aggressive approach, Selim forced his father to abdicate and quickly eliminated his brothers to secure the throne. Selim Lesar, known as Yavuz, the Resolute, transformed the empire through a series of whirlwind conquests during his brief but momentous 8-year reign from 1512 to 1520. His first target was Shah Ismail of Persia, founder of the Safavid dynasty that promoted Shiite Islam and had gained dangerous influence among Turkish tribes in eastern Anatolia. At the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, Selim's artillery and Janissary firearms proved decisive against Safavid cavalry, securing eastern Anatolia for the Ottomans and establishing the rough border between Turkey and Iran that persists to this day. This victory ensured that Anatolia would remain firmly within the Ottoman sphere, preventing the empire's heartland from being torn apart by religious and political divisions. Selim then turned south toward the Mamluk Sultanate that had ruled Egypt, Syria, and the Hejaz for centuries. In 2 campaigns of breathtaking speed and efficiency, Ottoman forces conquered Syria in 1516 and Egypt in 1517. With these victories came control of Islam's holiest cities, Mecca and Medina, elevating the Ottoman Sultan to the role of protector of the holy places. The last Abbasid caliph, maintained as a figurehead by the Mamluks, transferred the symbols of the caliphate to Selim, adding religious authority to Ottoman temporal power. While this transfer was of questionable legitimacy according to strict Islamic law, it became an important element of Ottoman claims to leadership of the Sunni Muslim world. These conquests dramatically expanded Ottoman resources and strategic position. Egypt's agricultural wealth provided enormous tax revenues, while control of the Red Sea opened new trade routes to the Indian Ocean. The empire now encompassed most of the central Islamic lands, with a vastly increased Arab population alongside its Turkish and Balkan subjects. The Magnificent Century. When Selim died suddenly in 1520, he left his son Suleiman a greatly expanded empire with secure borders and abundant resources. Suleiman would make the most of this inheritance during a remarkably long tenure, spanning nearly half a century. Under his leadership from 1520 to 1566, the Ottoman Empire would reach its apogee of power, territorial extent, and cultural achievement. The new sultan was 25 years old, educated in the palace school system that produced Ottoman administrators, and had already gained valuable experience as a provincial governor. He quickly proved his military prowess by capturing Belgrade in 1521, removing a fortress that had resisted Ottoman attacks for generations. This victory opened the way into the Hungarian plain, where rich agricultural lands and important trade routes awaited Ottoman control. The following year, Suleiman's forces took the island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller after a massive 6-month siege. This victory eliminated another long-standing Christian outpost in Ottoman waters, while demonstrating the empire's growing naval capabilities and organizational strength. Suleiman then turned his attention to Hungary, the main Christian power in southeastern Europe. At the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, fought on the rolling plains beside the Danube River, the Ottoman army achieved a stunning victory that would reshape the map of Central Europe. King Louis II of Hungary perished in the battle along with much of his kingdom's nobility, leaving Hungary divided between Ottoman direct rule in the central regions, Habsburg claims in the west, and a semi-independent Transylvania in the east. This catastrophic defeat for Christian Europe meant that the Ottoman Empire now extended deep into the heart of the continent. In 1529, Suleiman led an enormous expedition against Vienna itself, the Habsburg capital. Though ultimately unsuccessful due to early winter weather and the challenges of maintaining supply lines across such vast distances, the siege of Vienna represented the high water mark of Ottoman advance into Europe. For the next century and a half, the Ottomans and Habsburgs would contest supremacy in southeastern Europe in a complex chess game of diplomacy and warfare, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. This prolonged competition would shape the development of both empires, forcing each to adapt and evolve in response to the other's strengths and strategies. The Eastern campaigns and naval supremacy. While the European frontier draws much historical attention, Suleiman also campaigned extensively in the East, where different challenges and opportunities awaited. He led 3 major expeditions against Safavid Persia, ultimately capturing Baghdad and securing Ottoman control over Mesopotamia, the ancient land between the rivers where civilization itself had first flourished. These eastern campaigns were conducted across some of the world's most challenging terrain, through mountain passes and desert expanses that tested both human endurance and military logistics. Yet Suleiman's armies persevered, driven by their faith, their loyalty to their sultan, and their confidence in Ottoman superiority. Naval campaigns in the Indian Ocean challenged Portuguese dominance in those distant waters, while in the Mediterranean, the Ottoman fleet under the command of Hayreddin Barbarossa established complete naval supremacy. Barbarossa, known to Europeans as Redbeard, embodied the maritime ascendancy of this golden age. Rising from humble origins as a corsair operating from North African ports, Barbarossa became Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy through a combination of naval genius and unwavering loyalty to the Sultan. His fleets defeated Christian coalitions, secured North African territories for Ottoman suzerainty, and dominated the central and eastern Mediterranean. From bases in Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, Ottoman naval forces controlled the sea lanes that connected Europe, Africa, and Asia. Their distinctive ships, with their elegant lines and colorful banners, became familiar sights in ports from Gibraltar to the Levant. These maritime victories brought wealth, prestige, and strategic advantage to the empire, while spreading Ottoman influence far beyond the realm's land borders. Ottoman diplomacy also reached new levels of sophistication during Suleiman's reign. Breaking with Islamic tradition that had often viewed Christian powers primarily as enemies, the Sultan established a strategic alliance with France against their common Habsburg rivals. This partnership, shocking to many contemporaries, demonstrated Ottoman pragmatism and strategic thinking. Ottoman fleets wintered in French ports, and the two powers coordinated military actions across multiple theaters. Commercial agreements called capitulations granted French merchants favorable trading status in Ottoman ports, creating economic ties that complemented military cooperation. Similar arrangements would later be extended to other European powers, though these agreements, initially symbols of Ottoman strength and generosity, would eventually become tools of European economic penetration. The lawgiver's legacy. The Sultan's military achievements earned him the title Kanuni, meaning the lawgiver, among his Turkish subjects, while European chronicles remembered him as the Magnificent. Yet his reign was equally significant for its domestic developments, which created the institutional framework that would govern the empire for centuries. Suleiman commissioned his chief jurist to codify and reform Ottoman law, creating a comprehensive legal system that balanced secular regulations with Islamic Sharia. This remarkable achievement provided a framework for governing the empire's incredibly diverse populations while ensuring justice and consistency across vast territories. The legal code would endure, with modifications, well into the 19th century. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman administrative system reached its mature and most sophisticated form. At its heart was the palace complex, where the Sultan ruled with the assistance of the Imperial Council, or Divan. This governing body included the Grand Vizier, who acted as chief minister, along with other viziers responsible for different aspects of governance, military commanders, and chief financial and judicial officials. A sophisticated bureaucracy, staffed by men trained in the palace schools, implemented policies throughout the empire with remarkable efficiency. The system maintained careful balances of power that prevented any single group from challenging imperial authority. Most high officials came through the Devshirme system, owing their positions directly to the Sultan rather than to aristocratic birth or tribal connections. Meanwhile, religious scholars led by the Shaykhul Islam maintained significant autonomy in religious, educational, and judicial matters, providing a crucial counterweight to purely executive power. This careful balance between temporal and spiritual authority helped ensure both effective governance and religious legitimacy. Provincial administration followed a similar pattern of checks and balances. Governors appointed by the capital administered major provinces, but were balanced by locally appointed judges and military commanders who reported directly to Istanbul. The Timar system, which granted cavalrymen land rights in exchange for military service, distributed imperial authority into the countryside while providing a military force distinct from the Janissaries. Economic prosperity and cultural flowering. Economically, the empire thrived on its control of major trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ottoman territories encompassed ancient artisanal centers producing textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and luxury goods of exceptional quality. Imperial workshops in Istanbul created items for the court that rivaled anything produced in Europe or Asia. Guild organizations regulated urban production throughout the empire, maintaining high standards while controlling competition. These professional associations crossed religious lines, with Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together in many trades. The guild system enabled both quality control and social organization, providing mutual support for members while serving as intermediaries between craftsmen and the state. Agriculture provided the economic foundation, generating tax revenues and feeding growing urban populations. Most farmers were free peasants rather than serfs, though they were bound to their lands for tax purposes. The empire maintained grain reserves to prevent famine and stabilize prices, while long-distance trade flourished as merchants from diverse backgrounds created commercial networks spanning the empire and beyond. This economic prosperity supported remarkable cultural and architectural achievements. No figure better represents Ottoman artistic heights than Mimar Sinan, Suleiman's chief architect. Born a Christian in Anatolia and recruited through the Devshirme system, Sinan converted to Islam and rose through military engineering ranks before turning his genius to architecture. During a career spanning 50 years, he designed hundreds of structures, mosques, bridges, palaces, baths, and caravanserais throughout the empire. His masterpieces include the Shehzada Mosque, built to commemorate Suleiman's beloved son, the Suleymaniye Complex, the Sultan's Imperial Mosque in Istanbul, and the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, completed when Sinan was in his 80s. These structures synthesized Byzantine spatial concepts, particularly the large central dome, with Islamic architectural traditions and Ottoman innovations. The resulting style was both distinctively Ottoman and universally impressive in its engineering sophistication and aesthetic harmony. Walking through these buildings today, one can still feel the spiritual and artistic vision that inspired their creation. Literature flourished equally under imperial patronage. Ottoman Turkish poetry reached its classical form, heavily influenced by Persian models, but developing its own distinctive voice and sensibility. The court supported historians who documented the empire's achievements, scientists who advanced astronomical and mathematical knowledge, and religious scholars who produced sophisticated theological and legal works. The power behind the throne. Into this world of power and splendor came a figure who would profoundly influence Suleiman's later reign, Roxolana, known in Ottoman sources as Hürrem Sultan. Captured in what is now Ukraine and brought to the imperial harem, this remarkable woman captivated the Sultan, became his legal wife, and wielded extraordinary influence over both domestic and foreign policy. Breaking with centuries of tradition, Suleiman brought Roxolana to live with him in the main palace rather than keeping her in the separate harem quarters. She bore him several children and maintained her position as his chief confidant until her death in 1558, creating a partnership that was both political and deeply personal. Roxolana's rise transformed harem politics and imperial succession in ways that would have long-lasting consequences. Previously, sultans had maintained careful distance from their concubines once they had borne sons, preventing maternal influence over potential rivals for the throne. Roxolana changed this dynamic entirely, remaining close to both Suleiman and her sons throughout their lives. She built charitable foundations that provided services to the poor, corresponded with foreign rulers as an equal, and influenced appointments and policy decisions. While some historians have portrayed her as manipulative, evidence suggests a genuine partnership with Suleiman and shared concern for imperial stability and prosperity. The influence of powerful women in Ottoman politics would continue long after Roxolana's death, as subsequent generations of mothers, wives, and daughters of sultans played crucial roles in governance. This development reflected the complex nature of Ottoman royal households, where formal structures coexisted with informal networks of influence and patronage. Shadows in Paradise. The final decade of Suleiman's reign was marked by succession struggles among his sons that would have profound consequences for the empire's future. His eldest and most promising son, Mustafa, fell victim to court intrigues that possibly involved Roxolana's desire to advance her own son's interests. In 1553, during a campaign against Persia, Suleiman ordered Mustafa's execution, a decision that shocked contemporaries and some argue marked the beginning of a gradual shift in imperial fortunes. When Roxolana died in 1558, Suleiman was inconsolable, having lost not only his beloved companion, but also his most trusted political advisor. His remaining sons, Selim and Bayazid, soon turned against each other in open conflict. After Bayazid's defeat and execution, the less capable Selim remained as sole heir, representing a significant decline in the quality of potential leadership. By 1566, Suleiman was in his 70s, but still personally led his army on campaign, this time against Habsburg forces in Hungary. During the successful siege of Sigetvar, the aged Sultan quietly passed away in his tent, attended by his most trusted servants and advisors. Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha concealed the death until Selim could arrive to secure the throne, continuing the campaign as though the Sultan still lived and supervising an orderly transition of power. As Suleiman's body returned to Istanbul for burial in the magnificent tomb that Sinan had designed for him, the Ottoman Empire stood at its absolute zenith. Its territory stretched from Algeria to the Persian Gulf, from the Crimean Peninsula to Yemen. Its armies were the most formidable in the Mediterranean world, its bureaucracy the most sophisticated, and its cities among the most splendid. The governmental system that Suleiman had perfected seemed designed for permanence, with its careful balances and institutional checks that had prevented the kind of dynastic collapse that had destroyed other empires. Yet within this golden age lay the seeds of future challenges that would test Ottoman resilience in ways the architects of the system could never have imagined. The mature empire. As Selim Seku succeeded his father in 1566, the Ottoman Empire had reached heights that few political entities in history have achieved. It had successfully integrated diverse peoples and regions into a functioning imperial system that delivered security, prosperity, and cultural achievement to millions of subjects across 3 continents. The legacy of this golden age would endure long after Ottoman power had waned, shaping the modern Middle East, North Africa, and Balkans in ways that remain visible today. The architectural monuments, legal traditions, administrative practices, and cultural patterns established during this period created deep foundations that would support the empire through centuries of subsequent challenges. Yet even as the empire basked in the glory of Suleiman's achievements, subtle changes were already beginning to affect the delicate mechanisms of Ottoman governance. The practice of royal succession, the relationship between the Sultan and his officials, the empire's position in a rapidly changing world. All of these would face new pressures in the centuries to come. The Ottoman Empire at its height governed territories encompassing dozens of ethnic groups, religious communities, and traditional cultures. From the deserts of North Africa to the steppes of Crimea, from the mountains of the Balkans to the valleys of Mesopotamia, Ottoman rule bound together lands with profoundly different histories and populations through a sophisticated system of governance that balanced central authority with local autonomy. At the heart of Ottoman governance lay a principle of pragmatic flexibility that allowed the empire to adapt its rule to local conditions while maintaining core imperial institutions. Rather than imposing uniform administration across their vast domains, the Ottomans developed different approaches for different regions, creating a complex but effective system of imperial management. The Sultan stood at the apex of this system, embodying the state in his person and enjoying theoretically absolute power. His legitimacy flowed from multiple sources. He was guardian of Islam's holy places, heir to the Byzantine emperors, protector of vital trade routes, and head of the Ottoman dynasty, whose unbroken male line stretched back to Osman himself. In practice, however, the Sultan's authority was constrained by Islamic law, established customs, and the practical limits of pre-modern communication and transportation. Wise sultans understood that effective rule required the cooperation of many different groups and institutions, each with their own roles and interests. The architecture of power. Beneath the Sultan, the imperial government operated through specialized departments supervised by the Imperial Council. The Grand Vizier, as chief minister, coordinated governance and could represent the Sultan in most matters. Other viziers, along with treasurers, chancellors, and military commanders, comprised the highest ranks of administration. These officials met regularly in the divan to address matters of state, with the Sultan sometimes observing from behind a screened window that allowed him to hear discussions without being seen. This arrangement permitted frank debate among officials while maintaining the dignity and mystery appropriate to royal authority. Most high officials came through the Devshirme system, the periodic levy of Christian boys from rural areas in the Balkans and Anatolia. Converted to Islam and educated in palace schools, these recruits formed an elite administrative and military class that owed their positions directly to the Sultan rather than to aristocratic birth or tribal connections. This slave elite system prevented the emergence of hereditary nobility that might challenge imperial authority, a chronic problem that had plagued many other Islamic states throughout history. The Devshirme recruits, cut off from their original families and communities, developed fierce loyalty to the Ottoman state and the Sultan, who had elevated them from humble origins to positions of great power and responsibility. The military was similarly structured to balance different power centers. The Janissary Corps, elite infantry recruited through Devshirme, served as the empire's core professional army. Their skill with firearms and their discipline made them formidable on the battlefield, while their presence in major cities protected imperial interests against both foreign enemies and domestic challenges. Provincial cavalry supported by land grants under the Timar system provided a counterweight to Janissary power while extending imperial authority into rural areas. Artillery units, naval forces, and auxiliary troops completed a military establishment that, at its height, was arguably the most effective fighting force in the Mediterranean world. Religious harmony and social order. Religious institutions constituted another crucial pillar of imperial governance. The ulama, scholars trained in Islamic law and theology, formed a distinct hierarchy headed by the Shaykhul Islam, who could issue authoritative legal opinions even on the Sultan's actions. Religious foundations administered mosques, schools, hospitals, soup kitchens, and other public services throughout the empire. These institutions enjoyed considerable autonomy while providing essential social services that bound diverse regions to the imperial center through networks of religious scholarship and charity. The mosque complexes that dominated Ottoman cities served not only as places of worship, but as community centers that provided education, medical care, and social support. Perhaps most distinctive was the Ottoman approach to managing religious diversity through the millet system. Rather than forcing uniformity of belief, the empire recognized major religious communities as self-governing entities for many internal purposes. Each millet, organized under its religious leadership, handled matters of personal status like marriage, divorce, and inheritance according to its own religious law. The Greek Orthodox Millet, headed by the Patriarch of Constantinople, was the largest non-Muslim community. Armenian Christians, various Eastern Christian denominations, and Jews each formed their own millets with similar autonomy in religious and personal matters. This arrangement reflected Islamic jurisprudence regarding people of the book, but developed it into a sophisticated administrative system. Non-Muslims paid a special tax called jizya in exchange for protection and exemption from military service, while clearly establishing Islamic supremacy within the empire's hierarchy. Yet the millet system allowed significant religious freedom at a time when Europe was being torn apart by sectarian violence and religious wars. When Spain expelled its Jewish population in 1492, thousands found refuge in Ottoman lands, where Sultan Bayazid II reportedly remarked that Ferdinand of Spain was impoverishing his own kingdom while enriching Ottoman territories by sending such skilled and productive people into exile. Economic integration and urban culture. Economically, the Ottoman Empire linked diverse production zones into an integrated imperial market, while connecting to global trade networks that spanned from Atlantic Europe to the Indian Ocean. The empire controlled key commercial routes between Europe and Asia, particularly after the conquest of Egypt and Syria, secured both the eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea passages. Ottoman territories encompassed major production centers for textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and agricultural goods that were prized throughout the known world. State intervention in the economy aimed primarily at ensuring urban food supplies, maintaining quality standards for exports, and preventing any single group from dominating essential trades. Guild organizations regulated urban production throughout the empire, setting standards, controlling entry to trades, providing social services for members, and serving as intermediaries between craftsmen and the state. Guild membership crossed religious lines, with Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together in many trades while maintaining their distinct religious identities. Agriculture remained the foundation of imperial prosperity, with most of the population engaged in farming. Peasant cultivators enjoyed significant protections under law and custom, and their tax obligations were generally predictable and reasonable. Large-scale landholding was limited by imperial policy, which preferred small farms for both tax efficiency and military recruitment. State granaries helped stabilize food prices and prevent the worst effects of periodic shortages, maintaining urban calm and preventing the kind of bread riots that plagued other contemporary states. This careful attention to food security reflected Ottoman understanding that urban populations were the foundation of imperial power and prosperity. Trade networks spanned the empire, with merchants of various backgrounds creating commercial relationships that transcended regional and religious boundaries. Greeks and Armenians dominated much of the internal trade, while Turkish, Arab, and Persian merchants maintained connections with more distant Muslim lands. Jewish communities often specialized in international commerce, maintaining ties with co-religionists throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. the cosmopolitan capital. By the 16th century, Ottoman cities had become major consumption centers for luxury goods from every corner of the known world. These urban centers were typically organized around central complexes that combined mosques, markets, public baths, and educational institutions. Neighborhoods often developed along religious lines, each clustering around its own places of worship, though commercial districts brought various communities together in peaceful interaction. The Ottoman capital exemplified this urban culture at its most sophisticated. After the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II had rebuilt the depopulated Byzantine city as a magnificent Islamic capital while carefully preserving elements of its Christian heritage. Renamed Istanbul, though both names remained in use for centuries, the city was organized around great mosque complexes built by successive sultans. The skyline of domes and minarets created a visual harmony that complemented the ancient churches that remained active for the Christian population. The Topkapi Palace, situated on the ancient Acropolis overlooking the confluence of the Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, and the Sea of Marmara, served as both the Sultan's residence and the administrative heart of the empire. Istanbul became one of the world's largest cities, with a population exceeding 500,000 by the late 16th century. This cosmopolitan metropolis drew people from throughout the empire and beyond, creating a unique urban culture that transcended individual ethnic backgrounds while celebrating diversity. One could hear dozens of languages in Istanbul's markets: Italian and Persian, Greek and Arabic, Slavic tongues and Armenian, Turkish and Hebrew. Each community contributed to the city's cultural life while adapting to its Ottoman context, creating a distinctive urban identity that was both unmistakably Ottoman and remarkably inclusive. The material culture of Ottoman cities reflected this cosmopolitan sensibility. Architecture synthesized Byzantine spatial concepts with Islamic decorative traditions and Ottoman structural innovations. Textiles incorporated motifs from Persian, Chinese, Italian, and indigenous traditions. Ceramics from Iznik displayed Chinese-influenced designs executed with techniques developed in response to European innovations. Ottoman cuisine, perhaps the most accessible legacy of this cultural synthesis, blended Central Asian, Persian, Arab, and Balkan culinary traditions into something distinctively Ottoman, yet internally diverse. The elaborate meals served in palace kitchens, with their careful balance of flavors and artistic presentation, represented the empire's ability to create beauty and refinement from diverse cultural elements. Intellectual and artistic achievement. This cultural synthesis extended to intellectual life, where the Ottoman court patronized scholars, poets, historians, and scientists from diverse backgrounds. Literary culture centered on Turkish, Arabic, and Persian traditions, with many educated Ottomans comfortable in all three languages. Turkish served as the administrative language, Arabic remained the language of religion and law, and Persian continued as the language of high culture and poetry. Ottoman Turkish poetry reached particular heights of refinement during the empire's golden age. Following Persian models, but developing distinctive forms and sensibilities, Ottoman poets created works of remarkable subtlety and technical sophistication. The poetry of figures like Baki and Fuzuli explored themes of love, both human and divine, power and beauty, permanence and transience, in language that played endlessly with double meanings and literary allusions. Sultan Suleiman himself, writing under the pen name Muhibi, was a poet of considerable talent whose verses reflected both royal grandeur and personal sentiment. His poems, written during military campaigns and peaceful interludes alike, provide intimate glimpses into the mind of one of history's most powerful rulers. Historical writing flourished under imperial patronage, with court historians documenting Ottoman achievements for posterity. These works combined factual reporting with literary artistry and moral instruction, presenting Ottoman triumphs as evidence of divine favor while drawing lessons from occasional setbacks. Scholars produced encyclopedic works cataloging knowledge in fields ranging from geography to botany, astronomy to medicine, incorporating information from European sources alongside Islamic scholarly traditions. This intellectual openness reflected Ottoman confidence and curiosity about the wider world. Religious scholarship maintained its vitality throughout this period. Sufi mystical orders, particularly the Mevlevi, known in the West as whirling dervishes, and Bektashi orders, developed distinctive practices and interpretations of Islamic spirituality. Orthodox Sunni scholars produced sophisticated legal opinions addressing new situations confronting the empire. The interaction between mystical and legalistic approaches to Islam created a dynamic religious ecosystem that accommodated both popular piety and intellectual rigor. This theological diversity within Sunni Islam helped the empire maintain religious legitimacy while adapting to local traditions and contemporary challenges. Science and the arts. Science and medicine built upon earlier Islamic Golden Age achievements while incorporating new observations and techniques. Ottoman astronomical observatories made significant contributions, producing star catalogs and planetary tables of remarkable accuracy. These scientific institutions reflected the empire's commitment to learning and its understanding that knowledge was both religiously meritorious and practically useful. Medical knowledge combined traditional Islamic medicine, derived from Greek sources, with empirical observations and techniques from various traditions. Ottoman surgeons developed specialized procedures for eye operations, fracture treatment, and other conditions, while illustrated medical texts displayed their advanced understanding of anatomy and physiology. The visual arts developed along distinctive lines shaped by Islamic traditions regarding representation. Calligraphy became the supreme art form, with masters developing styles of extraordinary grace and complexity for transcribing Quranic verses and poetic works. The flowing lines of Ottoman calligraphy transformed religious texts into objects of sublime beauty. Geometric and floral designs achieved remarkable sophistication in architectural decoration, manuscript illumination, and textile patterns. These abstract motifs, infinitely varied yet harmoniously organized, reflected Islamic concepts of divine unity and the underlying mathematical order of creation. While figural representation was generally avoided in religious contexts, Ottoman miniature painting flourished for historical manuscripts, scientific works, and literary texts. These delicate paintings depicted court ceremonies, military campaigns, city views, and natural phenomena with meticulous detail and vibrant color. Music played a central role in Ottoman cultural life, from military bands that accompanied the Sultan's processions to Sufi ceremonies that used rhythm and melody to induce spiritual ecstasy. A sophisticated system of musical modes developed that was capable of expressing subtle emotional states while incorporating influences from Arab, Persian, Byzantine, and Turkish traditions. Distinctive instruments like the ney, reed flute, tanbur, long-necked lute, and kudum, small drums, created the characteristic sound of Ottoman classical music, which was transmitted orally from master to student in an unbroken chain that preserved both technique and spiritual meaning. Daily life in the Ottoman world. Daily life for ordinary Ottomans varied enormously depending on location, religion, occupation, and social status, yet certain patterns characterized the empire as a whole. For most people, the rhythm of life followed agricultural seasons and religious calendars that provided structure and meaning to existence. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities each observed their own holy days and life cycle rituals, creating a complex calendar of festivals and observances that enriched the cultural life of Ottoman cities and towns. Though public spaces often brought different groups together, private life typically centered on religious communities that provided identity, support, and continuity. Public baths served as important social centers, providing not only hygiene, but also opportunities for relaxation, conversation, and community building. These elegant buildings, with their domed chambers and flowing water, created spaces of tranquility and social interaction that crossed class and religious boundaries. Coffee culture emerged as a distinctive Ottoman social institution during the 16th century. Introduced from Yemen, coffee quickly became the empire's favorite beverage, with specialized coffee houses appearing in major cities. These establishments functioned as information exchanges, literary salons, political forums, and entertainment venues. The significance of coffee houses in Ottoman social life was so great that authorities occasionally closed them during periods of unrest, fearing their role as centers of discussion and potential dissent. Yet their popularity proved irresistible, and they soon reopened, continuing to serve as vital nodes in the urban social network. Family life centered on the household, which often included extended family members and, in wealthy homes, servants or slaves. Marriage patterns varied by religion and region, but most households operated under patriarchal authority that was tempered by custom, religious law, and practical considerations. Women's experiences ranged widely depending on class and location. Elite women could exercise significant influence through family connections and economic activities, controlling property and endowments that gave them real power. Rural women worked alongside men in agricultural production, while urban women often engaged in crafts and trade within gender-appropriate contexts. Though gender segregation was the norm in public spaces, women maintained active social networks within their communities and could wield considerable influence within domestic spheres. The harem system in wealthy households, rather than representing simple oppression, often provided women with education, security, and opportunities for advancement that were unavailable elsewhere. Education and entertainment. Popular entertainment included shadow puppet theaters that presented satirical stories, public storytellers who recounted epic tales, and sporting events like oil wrestling competitions and archery contests. Religious festivals brought communities together for processions, feasts, and celebrations that reinforced social bonds while providing relief from daily routine. The sultans staged elaborate public ceremonies for circumcisions, weddings, and military victories, distributing food and gifts to cement popular loyalty. These spectacular events, with their processions of costumed performers, displays of imperial wealth and generous charity, demonstrated Ottoman power while providing entertainment and sustenance for ordinary people. Education followed different paths for different social groups, but literacy rates in Ottoman cities were relatively high by contemporary standards. Most children received basic religious instruction in neighborhood schools attached to mosques, churches, or synagogues. Advanced education for Muslims centered on madrasas that taught Islamic law, theology, logic, and literature. The palace school provided specialized training for future administrators and military leaders, creating an educated elite capable of governing the empire's complex affairs. While formal education was largely male-dominated, informal knowledge transmission within households ensured that women acquired practical skills, cultural knowledge, and religious understanding appropriate to their expected roles. The Ottoman legal system balanced religious law with imperial legislation in ways that provided both flexibility and legitimacy. Sharia courts, administered by Qadi judges, handled most civil and criminal matters for Muslims, while non-Muslims could bring cases to their own religious courts or to Ottoman courts as they preferred. The Sultan's authority to issue qanun, secular administrative law, allowed the empire to address situations not covered by religious jurisprudence, creating a dual system that was both comprehensive and adaptable. This legal pluralism reflected Ottoman pragmatism and contributed to the empire's ability to govern diverse populations effectively. The height of civilization. By the mid-16th century, this complex social, political, and cultural system had reached its mature form. The Ottoman Empire had developed governance structures capable of managing extraordinary diversity while maintaining imperial cohesion. Its cultural achievements reflected both the synthesis of multiple traditions and original contributions across numerous fields. The strengths of this system were manifold: its flexibility in incorporating diverse peoples, its balance of central authority with local autonomy, its combination of religious legitimacy with practical governance, and its openness to cultural exchange and innovation within established frameworks. Yet these very strengths contained potential weaknesses as well. The delicate balances between competing power centers could be disrupted by weak leadership or external pressure. The accommodation between religious ideals and pragmatic realities created tensions that could be exploited by purists or reformers. The empire's vast scale made it inherently difficult to maintain uniform control as technologies and economic patterns evolved. As the 16th century drew to a close, the Ottoman Empire stood as perhaps the world's most sophisticated cosmopolitan civilization, spanning 3 continents and encompassing an extraordinary variety of peoples and traditions. Its cultural and institutional achievements would leave an enduring legacy in regions from the Balkans to Arabia, North Africa to the Caucasus. Even as new challenges would emerge in subsequent centuries, the fundamental patterns of Ottoman governance and culture established during this golden age would continue to shape the lives of millions and influence the development of successor states well into the modern era. Gentle transformation. When Suleiman the Magnificent passed away peacefully in 1566, the Ottoman Empire stood as perhaps the world's most powerful state, its territories stretching across 3 continents, its armies without peer, and its culture flourishing in countless forms of beauty and learning. Yet even at this moment of imperial triumph, subtle changes were beginning to flow through the empire like gentle currents that would gradually reshape the nature of Ottoman power. The seeds of these transformations had appeared even before Suleiman's death. His son and successor, Selim II, possessed a different temperament from his father, more inclined toward the pleasures of palace life than the rigors of military campaign. Known as Selim the Fair, due to his lighter complexion, he preferred to delegate most affairs of state to his capable Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha. While Sokolu maintained the empire's strength through his own considerable abilities, this pattern of sultanic withdrawal from active governance would become increasingly common in subsequent generations. The change reflected not weakness or decadence, but rather the natural evolution of an imperial system that had grown so sophisticated that it could function effectively, even when individual rulers chose to focus on different aspects of leadership. The Ottoman succession system, which had always carried inherent tensions, began to evolve in significant ways. Earlier sultans had practiced the harsh necessity of eliminating their brothers upon taking the throne to prevent civil wars that could tear the empire apart. Following Selim II's relatively peaceful accession, this practice gradually gave way to a new approach of confining princes to the palace, rather than sending them to provincial governorships where they could gain administrative and military experience. While this change reduced fratricidal violence within the royal family, it created new challenges. Future sultans, raised in the secluded luxury of palace chambers rather than trained in the practical arts of governance and warfare, often proved less prepared for rule when their time came. This shift would have profound consequences for the quality of imperial leadership in the centuries that followed. The Sultana's influence. This period also witnessed the increasing influence of what European observers called the Sultanate of Women, the political power exercised by imperial mothers, wives, and other female members of the royal household. The Valide Sultan, or mother of the reigning sultan, often wielded enormous influence, particularly when her son was young or disinclined toward active governance. Figures like Kosim Sultan and Turhan Sultan effectively guided the empire during much of the 17th century, building alliances with Janissary leaders and high officials to maintain their authority and influence policy. While some of these women proved capable and wise rulers, their power struggles sometimes contributed to instability in imperial governance. These changes in palace dynamics reflected the natural evolution of a dynasty that had ruled for generations. The informal networks of influence and patronage that developed around the royal household created new centers of power that complemented the formal structures of government, adding complexity to the already sophisticated Ottoman system. Meanwhile, the Ottoman military system faced its own gradual transformations. The Timur cavalry, once the backbone of Ottoman expansion across Anatolia and the Balkans, became increasingly less relevant as firearms came to dominate battlefields throughout the world. The Janissary Corps, originally an elite force of slave soldiers completely loyal to the Sultan, slowly evolved into something more like a hereditary military caste with their own economic interests and political agenda. Recruitment to the Janissary ranks increasingly came from free Muslim families rather than through the Devshirme levy of Christian boys, fundamentally changing the Corps' character and loyalties. What had once been an instrument of absolute sultanic power gradually became a powerful interest group within Ottoman society, capable of influencing policy and even challenging royal authority when their privileges were threatened. Technological and military challenges. Technological development, which had once favored the Ottomans, began to shift toward their European rivals. Where the empire had once led innovations in artillery design and fortress construction, they now found themselves falling behind European powers that were undergoing their own military revolutions. Ottoman firearms production and tactical doctrines failed to keep pace with Western developments, gradually eroding the technological superiority that had contributed to earlier victories. The once formidable Ottoman navy, which had dominated the Mediterranean under commanders like Barbarossa, began to lose its technological edge and organizational efficiency. European powers developed new ship designs, improved navigation techniques, and more effective naval tactics that slowly shifted the balance of maritime power. These military challenges became apparent in a series of costly conflicts that marked the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The long war with the Habsburgs between 1593 and 1606 ended in stalemate rather than the clear Ottoman victory that earlier generations might have expected. A difficult war with Persia resulted in territorial concessions that previous sultans would have found unthinkable. Most symbolically, the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571, though strategically indecisive in the long term, demonstrated that Ottoman fleets could be defeated by Christian coalitions. This psychological blow to Ottoman prestige reverberated throughout Europe and the Islamic world, suggesting that the empire was no longer invincible. Economic challenges emerged alongside military setbacks. The price revolution of the 16th century, fueled partly by American silver flowing into global markets through European trade, caused significant inflation throughout Ottoman territories. Traditional price controls became increasingly difficult to maintain as the empire found itself part of a broader global economic system that it could not fully control. The discovery of maritime routes around Africa gradually diverted some Asian trade away from Ottoman-controlled overland routes, though this effect was more gradual than once believed. Still, the empire's position as the essential bridge between European and Asian commerce began to face new competition from sea-based trade networks. The Ottoman land regime also underwent problematic shifts during this period. The Timar system, which had distributed land rights to cavalry soldiers in exchange for military service, slowly gave way to tax farming arrangements, where the right to collect taxes was auctioned to the highest bidder. While this initially increased revenue flowing to the central treasury, it created unfortunate incentives for short-term exploitation rather than long-term development. Tax farmers, seeking to maximize their profits during their limited terms of control, often imposed burdens on peasants that exceeded sustainable levels, damaging agricultural productivity and driving rural migration to cities. This shift represented a fundamental change in the relationship between the state and rural populations, moving away from the careful balance that had characterized earlier Ottoman governance. Administrative evolution. Administrative practices also evolved in ways that sometimes undermined the merit-based system that had been one of the empire's greatest strengths. Positions within the imperial bureaucracy, once reserved for advancement through the devshirme system and palace schools, were increasingly sold rather than earned through demonstrated competence. The practice of accepting gifts for appointments spread throughout the governmental hierarchy, creating networks of obligation and corruption that could interfere with effective administration. Even the position of Grand Vizier sometimes went to wealthy bidders rather than the most capable administrators, though many of these appointees still proved competent rulers. These internal challenges coincided with growing external pressures from multiple directions. The Habsburg and Russian empires, Ottoman rivals to the west and north, continued to grow stronger through their own military modernization and territorial expansion. Safavid Persia to the east remained a formidable opponent, while European commercial penetration of Ottoman markets intensified through capitulation agreements that increasingly favored foreign interests. Yet despite these mounting pressures, the Ottoman Empire demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Periods of crisis alternated with episodes of revival and reform, often under the guidance of capable Grand Viziers, who understood both the empire's challenges and its enduring strengths. The Köprülü family produced a series of distinguished administrators in the latter half of the 17th century who temporarily restored imperial effectiveness. Ahmed Köprülü led Ottoman forces in the conquest of Crete, culminating a decades-long struggle with Venice for control of this strategic Mediterranean island. The empire's territorial reach actually continued to expand in some regions even during this period of supposed decline. The Ottoman frontier pushed deeper into Ukraine and Poland-Lithuania, with vassal states like the Crimean Khanate extending imperial influence to the northern shores of the Black Sea. The Siege of Vienna. In 1683, Ottoman forces under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha mounted a massive expedition against Vienna, nearly capturing the Habsburg capital before being repulsed by a coalition of European powers. This campaign represented both the culmination of Ottoman military ambition in Europe and its ultimate frustration. The failed siege marked a turning point in Ottoman-European relations. The counteroffensive launched by the Holy League of Austria, Poland, Venice, and Russia inflicted a series of defeats on Ottoman armies that had grown accustomed to victory. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, ending what became known as the Great Turkish War, represented the first major territorial losses in the empire's history. Hungary and Transylvania passed to Habsburg control, while Venice gained territories in Greece and Poland. Russia secured lands in Ukraine and the northern Black Sea region. These losses shocked Ottoman elites into recognizing that traditional methods were no longer sufficient to maintain the empire's position in a rapidly changing world. The early 18th century saw the first systematic attempts at military and administrative reform, inspired partly by European models. During the period known as the Tulip Era, under Sultan Ahmed III and his Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, the empire cautiously opened its first printing press for Turkish texts, established new military training programs, and sent the first Ottoman ambassadors to European capitals to study Western techniques and institutions. These early reform efforts produced mixed results, as conservative reactions from religious scholars and Janissary corps members often reversed innovations that threatened established privileges and traditions. The Janissary Rebellion of 1730 overthrew Ahmed III and ended the Tulip Era reforms, establishing a pattern of attempted modernization followed by traditionalist backlash that would characterize much of the 18th century. Diplomatic challenges. The geopolitical environment grew increasingly challenging as European powers consolidated their strength and developed new military technologies. Russian expansion under Catherine the Great brought direct pressure on Ottoman territories around the Black Sea, while Austrian power remained formidable in southeastern Europe. The disastrous Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774 ended with the Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca, which granted Russia access to the Black Sea, conceded territory in Crimea, and allowed Russian ships passage through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles. Most ominously, the treaty gave Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians in Ottoman lands, providing a pretext for future interventions in imperial affairs. Equally threatening was the gradual rise of nationalist sentiment among the empire's subject peoples, particularly in the Balkans. Greek, Serbian, and Bulgarian cultural revivals, influenced by Enlightenment ideas filtering in from Europe, increasingly challenged Ottoman authority and the traditional basis of imperial legitimacy. The French Revolution further spread concepts of nationalism and popular sovereignty that undermined traditional imperial systems based on dynastic and religious authority. These new ideas found receptive audiences among educated elites throughout the Ottoman Empire, creating intellectual challenges to established patterns of governance. Sultan Selim III, who reigned from 1789 to 1807, recognized these mounting threats and initiated the most ambitious reform program yet attempted. His new order aimed to create a modern military force, trained and equipped along European lines, overhaul the tax system, and reform provincial administration to improve efficiency and responsiveness. While making some progress in military modernization and administrative reform, Selim ultimately faced a conservative coalition of janissaries, religious scholars, and traditional elites who viewed his changes as threats to both their privileges and Islamic traditions. In 1707, a Janissary revolt deposed Selim and nearly ended the reform movement entirely. Regional autonomy. The most dramatic challenge to central Ottoman authority came from regional governors who exploited imperial weakness to create semi-independent domains within the empire's nominal borders. In Egypt, an Albanian officer named Muhammad Ali Pasha seized power following the French occupation under Napoleon and built a modern army and navy while developing Egypt's economy along European lines. Though nominally acknowledging the Sultan's authority, Muhammad Ali created what was effectively an independent state that eventually threatened the Ottoman heartland itself. Similar powerful governors emerged in other provinces, from Ali Pasha of Ioannina in Greece to Ahmad al-Jazar in Palestine, each building their own power bases while paying only nominal tribute to Istanbul. By the early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire faced what seemed like existential threats on multiple fronts. Military defeats continued to erode imperial territory and prestige, while the Greek War of Independence beginning in 1821 gained support from European powers sympathetic to the Greek cause and hostile to Ottoman authority. Russian forces repeatedly defeated Ottoman armies, advancing to within striking distance of Istanbul itself. In the 1830s, Muhammad Ali's Egyptian forces occupied Syria and threatened Anatolia, forcing the Sultan to seek protection from European powers that were themselves competitors for influence in Ottoman territories. European diplomats increasingly referred to the declining Ottoman state as the sick man of Europe, debating how its territories might be divided upon its seemingly imminent collapse. Yet despite these dire predictions, the empire would survive for another century through a combination of internal reforms, skillful diplomacy that played rival European powers against each other, and the remarkable resilience of its institutions and populations. Adaptation and Resilience. The period from the late 16th to the early 19th centuries thus represents not so much an absolute decline as a complex transformation of Ottoman power and methods. While the empire lost its position of clear military superiority over European rivals, it adapted to new geopolitical realities with considerable flexibility and ingenuity. The Ottoman state evolved from an expanding militant empire into a defensive multi-ethnic polity focused on maintaining territorial integrity against both external enemies and internal centrifugal forces. This transformation came at significant cost in terms of lost territories, population displacements, economic difficulties, and political instability. Yet the fundamental Ottoman imperial system demonstrated surprising durability. The basic institutions of governance, the millet system of religious community autonomy, and the cultural patterns established during the Golden Age persisted throughout these challenges, adapting to changing circumstances rather than collapsing entirely under pressure. The traditional narrative of Ottoman decline, with its implication of inevitable decay and collapse, fails to capture this complex reality of adaptation and resilience. More accurate is a picture of an empire confronting unprecedented challenges: the military revolution in Europe, the transformation of global trade networks, the emergence of nationalist ideologies, and the Industrial Revolution that would soon reshape global power dynamics. That the Ottoman Empire survived these challenges at all, when many contemporary states did not, testifies to the fundamental strength of the structures established during its formative periods and the continued vitality of its diverse populations. As the 19th century dawned, the Ottoman Empire stood at another crossroads in its long history. The old methods had clearly proven insufficient for the new world that was emerging, but the path forward remained uncertain and contested. The next phase of Ottoman history would be defined by ambitious attempts at systematic modernization and reform, efforts that would transform the empire in ways its founders could never have imagined. The dawn of reform. As the 19th century began, the Ottoman Empire faced a stark reality that could no longer be ignored. Its armies, once the terror of Europe, had suffered repeated defeats at the hands of better organized and better equipped European forces. Its territories were slowly shrinking under pressure from external enemies and nationalist movements. Its economy struggled against foreign competition and internal structural problems. Yet rather than succumb to these pressures, the empire embarked on the most ambitious period of reform and transformation in its long history. This process began in earnest when Sultan Mahmud II ascended to the throne in 1808, amid multiple crises that threatened the very survival of the state. The empire faced active rebellions in Serbia and Greece, Muhammad Ali's growing autonomy in Egypt, and Russian expansion along the Black Sea coast. Domestically, powerful provincial notables called ayans had established virtual independence in many regions, while the Janissary Corps remained hostile to necessary military reforms and jealously guarded their traditional privileges. Mahmud approached these challenges with the patience and methodical planning of a master strategist. He first reached an accommodation with the ayans through diplomatic agreements that acknowledged their local power while reasserting their theoretical subordination to Istanbul. This temporary compromise gave him breathing room to address more fundamental problems. Meanwhile, he quietly built a small corps of troops trained in modern European methods, carefully preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Janissaries, who represented the greatest obstacle to military modernization. This preparation required extraordinary discretion, as premature action could have triggered the very revolt he sought to prevent. The auspicious incident. The long-anticipated confrontation came in the summer of 1826, in what became known as the Auspicious Incident. When the Janissaries revolted against proposed new military formations, Mahmud was ready with carefully laid plans. He had secured backing from religious authorities who declared the revolt contrary to Islamic law, rallied public support by emphasizing the need for effective defense against foreign enemies, and positioned loyal artillery units in strategic locations. When the Janissaries gathered in their traditional assembly area, expecting to intimidate the government into abandoning reform plans, they found themselves surrounded by cannon positioned on the surrounding heights. The bombardment that followed was swift and decisive, ending centuries of Janissary influence over Ottoman politics and clearing the way for comprehensive military modernization. With the Janissaries eliminated, Mahmud accelerated reforms across multiple fronts with the energy of a ruler who understood that time was running short. He created a new army based on European models, with modern weapons, uniforms, and training methods that emphasize discipline and professionalism over traditional warrior culture. He reorganized the central bureaucracy, establishing specialized ministries to replace the traditional divan system that had served the empire for centuries. Tax collection was reformed to reduce corruption and increase efficiency, while efforts were made to combat the endemic bribery that had weakened administrative effectiveness. Even Mahmud's personal appearance signaled the depth of change he sought to achieve. He adopted European-style clothing, trimmed his beard according to Western fashion, and encouraged his officials to do likewise. These symbolic changes, while seemingly superficial, communicated to both domestic and foreign audiences that the Ottoman Empire was serious about transformation. Continuing challenges. Mahmud's reforms laid crucial groundwork for modernization, but external events limited their immediate effectiveness. The Greek War of Independence, supported by European powers sympathetic to the Greek cause and hostile to Ottoman rule, resulted in the loss of southern Greece and dealt a severe blow to imperial prestige. Russia inflicted another devastating military defeat in the War of 1828 to 1829, forcing territorial concessions in the Caucasus and increased Russian influence over Ottoman affairs. Most dangerous of all was the rebellion of Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, whose modernized army occupied Syria and threatened Anatolia itself, forcing Mahmud to seek Russian protection through the humiliating Treaty of Hungar-Skalisi in 1833. Despite these setbacks, the reform impulse survived Mahmud's death in 1839 and found new expression under his son, Abdul Majid. The new sultan continued and expanded his father's work through the famous Tanzimat Reforms, which represented the most systematic attempt yet to modernize Ottoman state and society. The Tanzimat, meaning reorganization, began with the noble rescript of the Rose Chamber in 1839, which proclaimed a revolutionary reconceptualization of the relationship between the state and its citizens. The reforms promised equality before the law for all Ottoman subjects, regardless of religion, guaranteed security of life and property, abolished tax farming, established regular military conscription, and created new secular courts alongside the traditional religious legal system. Though implementation was often uneven across the empire's vast territories, these measures represented a fundamental shift away from the traditional Islamic concept of protected minorities toward a more modern notion of equal citizenship within a unified state. The Tanzimat Reformers. Behind these reforms stood a remarkable group of Ottoman statesmen who had served as diplomats in European capitals and understood both Western power and Ottoman needs. Figures like Mustafa Reshid Pasha, Ali Pasha, and Fuad Pasha recognized that the empire's survival required not blind Westernization, but careful adaptation of European methods to strengthen the Ottoman state while preserving its essential character and independence. Their approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of both the sources of European strength and the unique challenges facing the Ottoman Empire. They sought to create a modern, efficient state that could compete with European powers while maintaining the religious and cultural foundations that gave the empire legitimacy in the eyes of its diverse populations. Education became a major focus of the Tanzimat reforms, with new secular schools established alongside traditional religious institutions. These modern schools taught European languages, modern sciences, and administrative skills that were essential for effective governance in the contemporary world. The School of Civil Administration trained bureaucrats according to European standards, while medical and engineering schools produced specialists needed for military and economic modernization. A new Western-style university, the Darul Funun, was eventually established to provide advanced education in multiple fields. These educational reforms created a new class of Ottomans who were comfortable with both Islamic and European intellectual traditions, capable of serving as bridges between different worlds and different ways of thinking about governance, society, and progress. Legal and administrative reform. The legal system underwent similarly comprehensive transformation during the Tanzimat period. New commercial and criminal codes adapted from European models were introduced alongside traditional Islamic law, creating a dual system that could handle the complexities of a modernizing society. Mixed courts were established to handle cases involving foreign nationals, reflecting the empire's increasing integration into European diplomatic and commercial systems. The judicial reforms culminated in the late Tanzimat era with the promulgation of the Mekel in 1876, a codification of Islamic civil law that harmonized traditional jurisprudence with modern legal principles. Communications infrastructure expanded dramatically during this period, connecting the empire's far-flung provinces to the capital in ways that would have seemed miraculous to earlier generations. Telegraph lines allowed more direct central control over provincial administration, while railways began to link major Ottoman cities, though coverage remained limited compared to European networks. Steamship lines improved maritime connections between different parts of the empire, and the first Ottoman newspapers were established, eventually creating a vibrant press that, despite censorship, fostered a new public sphere for political and cultural discourse. International recognition. The Tanzimat period also witnessed significant changes in Ottoman foreign relations. The Crimean War of the mid-1850s temporarily reversed the empire's fortunes, as Britain and France allied with the Ottomans against Russian expansion. The resulting Treaty of Paris formally recognized the Ottoman Empire as part of the European state system and guaranteed its territorial integrity. This diplomatic achievement was followed by the Reform Edict of 1856, which reaffirmed and expanded the principle of equality for all Ottoman subjects, regardless of religion. These measures were designed partly to satisfy European expectations, but they also reflected genuine Ottoman commitment to creating a more just and efficient system of governance. Yet these reforms also created new tensions within Ottoman society that would have lasting consequences. Traditional religious scholars and conservatives viewed many westernizing reforms with suspicion, seeing them as capitulation to Christian powers and abandonment of Islamic principles. Many Muslims resented the equality granted to non-Muslim minorities, who often benefited disproportionately from new economic opportunities through their connections to European merchants and their familiarity with European languages and customs. Provincial populations sometimes experienced reforms primarily as increased taxation and military conscription rather than as improvements to their lives, creating resentment against central government initiatives that were intended to strengthen and modernize the state. Economic dependencies. Economic challenges further complicated reform efforts throughout this period. The Ottoman Empire increasingly functioned as a supplier of raw materials and a market for manufactured goods within the expanding European-dominated global economy. Commercial treaties dating back to the 16th century had granted European merchants advantageous terms that prevented the Ottomans from protecting domestic industries through tariffs. The empire borrowed heavily from European banks to finance modernization projects and cover budget deficits, gradually losing financial independence as debt service consumed ever larger portions of government revenues. This financial dependency reached crisis proportions in 1875 when the Ottoman government declared partial bankruptcy, unable to service its massive foreign debt. European powers responded by establishing the Ottoman Public Debt Administration in 1881, giving foreign creditors direct control over significant portions of Ottoman revenues. While this arrangement stabilized Ottoman finances and allowed continued access to international capital markets, it further limited the empire's economic sovereignty and ability to pursue independent policies. Constitutional monarchy. The mid-19th century also saw the emergence of new intellectual currents among Ottoman elites that would have profound political consequences. A group known as the Young Ottomans, including influential figures like Namık Kemal, Ibrahim Shinasi, and Ziya Pasha, advocated constitutional government and greater political freedoms while seeking to reconcile Islamic principles with modern political concepts. Through newspapers, literature, and political activism, they popularized ideas of patriotism, liberty, and constitutional rule among educated Ottomans. Their writings created new vocabularies for discussing political concepts and helped prepare the intellectual ground for later constitutional movements. These intellectual developments contributed to the brief triumph of constitutional government in the Ottoman Empire. Amid continuing crisis in the Balkans and pressure from reformist elements, Sultan Abdülhamid II promulgated the first Ottoman constitution in December 1876, establishing a parliament with representatives from throughout the empire. This experiment in constitutional monarchy proved short-lived, however. Using the ongoing war with Russia as justification, Abdülhamid suspended the constitution after only 2 sessions of parliament and began a period of personal rule that would last 3 decades. The Hamidian Era. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 delivered another devastating blow to Ottoman power and prestige. Russian forces advanced to the outskirts of Istanbul before being halted by diplomatic pressure from other European powers who feared Russian domination of the strategic straits. The resulting Treaty of San Stefano imposed harsh terms that would have created a large Bulgarian state under Russian influence and recognized the independence of Serbia, Romania, and Montenegro. Though the subsequent Congress of Berlin, organized by the European powers, moderated some of these losses, the empire still surrendered significant territories in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and eastern Anatolia. These territorial losses triggered massive population movements as hundreds of thousands of Muslims fled from Russian and newly independent Balkan territories to remaining Ottoman lands. This refugee crisis fundamentally altered the demographic composition of the empire, making it more predominantly Muslim than ever before, while creating social and economic pressures that strained imperial resources. For 33 years, from 1876 until his deposition in 1909, Sultan Abdulhamid II developed a distinctive approach to governance that combined administrative modernization with political centralization. While abandoning the liberal political aspects of the Tanzimat Reforms, he continued infrastructure development and educational expansion, while emphasizing Islamic religious identity and repressive measures against political dissent. Abdulhamid made effective use of modern technology to strengthen his control over the empire. Telegraph networks were expanded to maintain direct communication with provincial officials, while photography was employed to document public works projects and project imperial power throughout the realm. The railway system grew substantially during his reign, improving both economic integration and military mobility. Educational reforms continued, producing a new generation of technically trained Ottoman officials, officers, and professionals who would play crucial roles in the empire's final transformations. Pan-Islamic Policy. The Sultan emphasized his role as caliph, or religious leader of Sunni Muslims worldwide, more than his predecessors had done. This pan-Islamic policy served multiple purposes. It strengthened loyalty among Muslim subjects, positioned the empire as protector of Muslims beyond its borders, and countered European influence by appealing to religious solidarity that transcended national boundaries. Abdulhamid cultivated relationships with Muslims in British India, Russian Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, creating concern among colonial powers about potential Muslim uprisings inspired by Ottoman leadership. This religious diplomacy helped maintain Ottoman relevance in world affairs, even as the empire's military and economic power declined relative to European competitors. Yet alongside these innovations came growing repression of political opposition. Censorship tightened throughout the empire, liberal intellectuals fled into exile, and an extensive spy network monitored potential dissidents. Ottoman embassies were tasked with tracking exile communities whose publications were smuggled back into the empire despite official bans. The most significant opposition movement to emerge during this period was the Committee of Union and Progress, commonly known as the Young Turks. Growing from student activism at the empire's medical and military academies, this movement initially brought together Turks, Arabs, Albanians, Circassians, and others united by opposition to Abdulhamid's autocracy and commitment to constitutional governance. The Young Turk Revolution. While political tensions mounted within the empire, demographic and economic transformations continued to reshape Ottoman society. Cities grew rapidly as rural migrants sought economic opportunities and refugees resettled from lost territories. Istanbul, Izmir, Beirut, and Salonika developed more modern infrastructure, including tramways, gas lighting, and Western-style buildings. An emerging middle class adopted European consumption patterns and cultural habits while maintaining distinctively Ottoman identities. The empire's religious and ethnic composition changed significantly due to territorial losses, refugee flows, and varying demographic patterns among different communities. These changes influenced ongoing debates about the nature of Ottoman identity and the future direction of the state. Competing visions for the empire's future had crystallized among educated elites. Ottomanism promoted a civic identity, embracing all citizens regardless of religion or ethnicity. Islamism emphasized religious solidarity as the empire's core strength. Turkish nationalism began to foreground Turkish language and culture as the state's foundation. During the summer of 1908, these long-simmering tensions finally erupted into revolution when Ottoman army units in Macedonia, led by young Turk officers, revolted against the central government. Facing the prospect of civil war and the potential intervention of European powers, Abdul Hamid reluctantly restored the 1876 constitution and allowed elections for a new parliament. The Young Turk Revolution triggered momentary euphoria across the empire, with Muslims, Christians, and Jews celebrating together in public displays of Ottoman unity and constitutional patriotism. This brief honeymoon period seemed to validate the dream of a reformed, democratic Ottoman state that could unite all its peoples in common citizenship. Constitutional challenges. The restored constitutional era quickly revealed deep underlying tensions, however. Counter-revolutionary forces attempted to reverse the changes in the spring of 1909, briefly succeeding before being overcome by constitutionalist troops marching from Macedonia. Abdul Hamid was deposed in favor of his brother Mehmed V, who became a constitutional monarch with strictly limited powers. The Committee of Union and Progress gradually consolidated control over the government, evolving from a revolutionary organization into a political party with increasingly authoritarian tendencies. Their vision of Ottoman democracy proved quite different from the liberal, inclusive system many had hoped the revolution would create. External crises further complicated this turbulent period of political experimentation. Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, which it had occupied since the Congress of Berlin. Italy invaded and annexed the Ottoman provinces of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, modern Libya, in 1911 to 1912, demonstrating continued European appetite for Ottoman territories. Most devastatingly, the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 swept away nearly all remaining Ottoman territories in Europe, including the historic city of Salonika, where the Young Turk movement had been born. Only a small foothold around Istanbul remained of the empire's once vast European domains. These defeats discredited the initial Young Turk leadership, but strengthened the hand of more nationalist elements within the movement. Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha emerged as the dominant triumvirate steering Ottoman policy in an increasingly Turkish nationalist direction. The liberal, multi-ethnic vision of the early Young Turk movement gave way to a more centralizing, Turkish-oriented approach that alienated Arab, Albanian, and other non-Turkish elites who had initially supported the constitutional revolution. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Ottoman Empire had undergone profound transformation. Its territory had contracted dramatically with the loss of the Balkans, North Africa, and parts of the Caucasus. Its population had become more predominantly Muslim and increasingly concentrated in Anatolia and the Arab provinces. Yet the empire had also modernized substantially, with centralized bureaucracy, improved communications, expanded education, and rationalized legal systems. The question that remained was whether these reforms would prove sufficient to preserve the empire in an increasingly competitive and dangerous world. The Great War approaches. As tensions mounted throughout Europe in the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire found itself facing fundamental questions about its future survival and orientation. Could it retain its remaining territories in the face of continued European imperialism and growing nationalist movements? Would its constitutional system evolve toward genuine democracy or revert to authoritarian rule? Most urgently, how would the empire position itself in the growing conflict between the great powers that would soon explode into the catastrophe of World War I? In the summer of 1914, as Europe moved inexorably toward war, the Ottoman Empire stood at yet another crossroads in its long and eventful history. Despite earning the sobriquet "Sick Man of Europe," the empire had survived a century of crisis through remarkable adaptation and reform. Its institutions had proven surprisingly resilient. Its populations had shown continued loyalty despite numerous hardships, and its leaders had demonstrated considerable ingenuity in navigating seemingly impossible challenges. But the greatest test still lay ahead, as Ottoman leaders prepared to make fateful decisions that would determine not just the empire's fate, but the entire shape of the modern Middle East. The choices made in the coming years would echo through history, creating the foundations for the nation-states that would emerge from the empire's eventual transformation. The final chapter. On a warm summer day in 1914, two ships appeared on the horizon of Istanbul's magnificent harbor. The German battlecruiser Goeben and light cruiser Breslau, pursued by British naval forces through the Mediterranean, sought refuge in Ottoman waters. Their arrival would set in motion a chain of events that would fundamentally alter the course of history. Ottoman leaders made the momentous decision to allow these vessels into the Dardanelles, technically violating neutrality agreements with the Allied powers. Renamed Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midili, and ostensibly purchased for the Ottoman Navy, with their German crews now wearing Turkish uniforms, these warships symbolized the empire's gradual drift toward the Central Powers in the opening days of what would become the Great War. This alignment was not the Ottoman Empire's first choice. When European war erupted in August 1914, the initial Ottoman position was careful neutrality. The empire had emerged exhausted from the Balkan Wars just a year earlier, having lost nearly all its remaining European territories and faced a massive refugee crisis as Muslims fled advancing Balkan armies. The military, economy, and public morale all desperately needed time to recover from these recent traumatic experiences. Moreover, traditional Ottoman diplomatic strategy had long favored balancing rival European powers against each other rather than committing firmly to any single alliance. The path to alliance. Yet several factors gradually pushed the empire toward Germany and Austria-Hungary. The triumvirate dominating Ottoman politics, Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, had grown deeply suspicious of Russian, British, and French intentions toward the remaining Ottoman territories. Russia's historical ambition to control the Turkish Straits remained a constant threat to the empire's survival. Britain had occupied Ottoman Egypt decades earlier and showed no signs of returning this wealthy province. France had clearly expressed interest in Ottoman Syria and Lebanon. Just before the war erupted, Britain had controversially requisitioned 2 warships being built for the Ottoman Navy in British shipyards, vessels that had been paid for through public subscription and had become matters of intense national pride. This action was seen as a betrayal of trust and a symbol of British unreliability as a partner. Germany, by contrast, had cultivated Ottoman friendship through investment, military advisors, and railway construction, particularly the ambitious Berlin-Baghdad Railway that promised to connect the Ottoman heartland with European markets. Kaiser Wilhelm II had twice visited Istanbul, presenting himself as a protector of Islam and a friend to Ottoman independence. German diplomatic and military influence in Istanbul had grown steadily, with officers like General Lehmann von Sanders overseeing the modernization of Ottoman armed forces according to the latest European standards. Most decisive was the personal conviction of Enver Pasha, the dynamic young minister of war who had emerged as the empire's most powerful figure. The decision for war. German-trained and an admirer of German military efficiency, Enver believed in Germany's ultimate victory and saw alliance with the Central Powers as the empire's best hope for survival and recovery of lost territories. On August 2, 1914, he signed a secret Ottoman-German alliance, though many members of his own cabinet remained unaware of its provisions. The final step toward active participation in the war came in late October 1914, when Ottoman warships, including the former Goeben under German officers, bombarded Russian ports in the Black Sea. Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire on November 2nd, followed shortly by Britain and France. The Ottomans formally entered the conflict on November 14th, with the Sultan Caliph declaring jihad against the Entente powers, a religious call to arms that produced disappointingly limited response both within and beyond Ottoman territories, suggesting that religious solidarity alone was insufficient to overcome political and military realities. Thus began what would prove to be the most devastating conflict in Ottoman history, a war fought across multiple fronts that would ultimately bring about the empire's dissolution after 6 centuries of existence. Multiple fronts. From the snowy Caucasus Mountains to the burning deserts of Arabia, from the waters of the Dardanelles to the banks of the Suez Canal, Ottoman forces found themselves facing the combined might of the world's greatest empires in a struggle for survival that would test every resource and capability the state possessed. The conflict began with a catastrophic defeat in the Caucasus. Enver Pasha personally led an ambitious winter offensive against Russian forces, hoping to recapture territories lost in previous wars and perhaps inspire an Islamic uprising among Muslims in Central Asia. The campaign ended in disaster at the Battle of Sarikamish during the harsh winter months of December 1914 and January 1915. Of 90,000 soldiers who began the campaign with high hopes, fewer than 15,000 returned alive, with thousands perishing from cold and exposure in the treacherous mountain passes. This defeat had profound consequences beyond the immediate military loss, as it allowed Russian forces to advance deep into eastern Anatolia and created conditions for terrible tragedy among the empire's Armenian population. Ottoman authorities, already suspicious of Armenian nationalist aspirations and facing military collapse in the east, ordered the deportation of the Armenian population from the war zone, claiming military necessity. What followed was one of the darkest episodes in the empire's final years, a campaign of forced marches and displacement that resulted in enormous suffering and loss of life. While Ottoman officials maintained these were unplanned consequences of wartime emergency measures, the scale of the tragedy was undeniable. Many Turkish and Kurdish officials tried to protect local Armenians, and countless ordinary Muslims sheltered their Armenian neighbors at great personal risk. But these humanitarian efforts could not prevent the broader catastrophe. The Dardanelles Campaign. While the Eastern Front descended into tragedy, another dramatic struggle unfolded at the Dardanelles. British and French planners, seeking to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and open a supply route to Russia, conceived an ambitious operation to force the straits and capture Istanbul. The campaign began with a naval assault in March 1915, but Ottoman minefields and shore batteries, carefully positioned and courageously defended, repelled the Allied fleet. The Allies then launched an amphibious invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915, confident that this would quickly break Ottoman resistance. What was intended as a swift operation turned into a prolonged and bloody stalemate lasting 9 months. Ottoman defenders, led by a previously little-known officer named Mustafa Kemal, held their ground against forces from Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand, with determination and tactical skill that surprised their enemies. The campaign ultimately failed, with Allied forces evacuating in late December 1915 and early January 1916 after suffering over 250,000 casualties. Ottoman losses were even higher, but they had achieved a significant defensive victory that boosted national morale and made Mustafa Kemal a military hero whose reputation would only grow in the years ahead. Other theaters. Further south, Ottoman forces moved against the Suez Canal in February 1915, hoping to sever Britain's imperial lifeline to India. Though this attack was repulsed, it forced Britain to maintain substantial forces in Egypt, rather than deploying them to the Western Front in Europe. A second, larger offensive the following year also failed to achieve its objectives, after which British forces began their own advance into Ottoman Palestine, gradually pushing northward despite determined Ottoman resistance. In Mesopotamia, British forces advancing from Basra initially met with success, but Ottoman forces inflicted a major defeat on them at Kut, where an entire British army was forced to surrender after a 5-month siege. This victory, alongside Gallipoli, demonstrated that Ottoman forces remained capable of effective resistance despite the empire's overall weakness. Perhaps most consequential for the empire's future was the Arab Revolt that began in June 1916. Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca, motivated by both Arab nationalist aspirations and British promises of post-war independence, led an uprising against Ottoman rule in the Hejaz. Though the revolt's direct military impact was limited, its symbolic significance was enormous. supported by British officers like T.E. Lawrence and Arab nationalist intellectuals, the revolt presented an alternative vision of post-Ottoman political organization based on Arab identity rather than Islamic unity or Ottoman patriotism. The revolt reflected deeper tensions that had developed between the increasingly Turkish nationalist Young Turk regime and Arab elites throughout the empire. The Committee of Union and Progress governments centralizing policies, Turkish linguistic nationalism, and wartime security measures had alienated many Arab leaders who had previously supported Ottoman constitutionalism. British and French encouragement of Arab aspirations, though ultimately self-serving, found fertile ground in this growing disillusionment with Ottoman rule. The promise of independence and self-determination appealed to educated Arabs who had begun to imagine alternatives to imperial governance. At the same time, ominous developments in international diplomacy were shaping the empire's future without Ottoman participation or consent. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 between Britain and France outlined detailed plans to divide Ottoman Arab territories into spheres of influence after the war. The Balfour Declaration of November 1917 expressed British support for establishing a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. These arrangements, made public by the Bolsheviks after the Russian Revolution, revealed Allied intentions that contradicted promises made to Arab leaders and deeply alarmed Ottoman officials. The empire's final struggles. By 1917, the cumulative effects of years of warfare had brought the Ottoman Empire to the brink of collapse. Military casualties approached 1 million men, while economic conditions had deteriorated dramatically as the government requisitioned food supplies, causing widespread hunger throughout the civilian population. Disease spread through populations weakened by malnutrition, while inflation rendered currency nearly worthless, forcing people to resort to barter systems for basic necessities. The government adopted increasingly authoritarian measures to maintain control, further alienating populations that had already endured years of hardship. German influence over Ottoman affairs grew ever stronger as the empire became completely dependent on its ally for military equipment, financial support, and strategic guidance. This dependency, while necessary for continued resistance, reduced Ottoman sovereignty and limited the empire's ability to pursue independent policies. Despite these dire circumstances, Ottoman forces continued to fight effectively on multiple fronts, demonstrating remarkable resilience and tactical skill. In Palestine, they repeatedly slowed British advances through skillful defensive operations before finally being defeated at the Battle of Megiddo in September 1918. In Mesopotamia, they conducted organized withdrawals despite material inferiority, while on the Caucasus front, the collapse of Russia following the Bolshevik Revolution actually allowed Ottoman forces to recapture some territories lost earlier in the war. The domestic situation continued to deteriorate throughout 1918, however. In October, with Germany clearly headed for defeat on the Western Front, and British forces advancing rapidly through Syria, the Ottoman government finally acknowledged reality. Talat Pasha's cabinet resigned on October 14th, and the new government under Ahmed Izzet Pasha immediately sought an armistice with the Allied powers. On October 30th, 1918, Ottoman representatives signed the Armistice of Mudros aboard a British warship in the Aegean Sea, ending Ottoman participation in the Great War. Occupation and resistance. The armistice terms were harsh but deliberately vague, allowing the Allies broad discretion for future intervention in Ottoman affairs. British, French, Italian, and Greek forces soon occupied various Ottoman territories, including strategic parts of Anatolia itself. Istanbul came under Allied occupation, with foreign warships anchored prominently in the Bosphorus and international troops patrolling the capital's streets. The Sultan and his government continued to function, but under close foreign supervision and with severely limited authority over their own territory. The post-war settlement imposed on the Ottoman Empire was embodied in the Treaty of Sèvres, signed on August 10, 1920. This document effectively dismantled what remained of the empire, separating the Arab provinces as mandates under British and French control, while ceding eastern Thrace and the area around Izmir to Greece. The Turkish Straits were to be internationalized under Allied control. An independent Armenian state was to be created in eastern Anatolia, and the Kurds were promised autonomy that might lead to eventual independence. International financial controls would govern what remained of Turkish finances, while the rump Turkish state would consist of little more than central Anatolia. But events had already begun to overtake this settlement. While the Sultan's government in occupied Istanbul reluctantly accepted Allied dictates, a resistance movement was forming in the Anatolian interior under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal, the hero of Gallipoli. The birth of modern Turkey. Landing at Samsun on May 19, 1919, ostensibly to restore order on behalf of the Istanbul government, Mustafa Kemal instead began organizing nationalist resistance to the post-war settlement. He quickly established contact with other nationalist officers and civilian leaders, convening a series of congresses that articulated a platform of territorial integrity and national independence. When the Istanbul government yielded to Allied pressure and dissolved the Ottoman parliament in early 1920, Kemal established a rival Grand National Assembly in Ankara on April 23, 1920, effectively creating a dual government situation that challenged both Allied plans and sultanic authority. The Greek landing at Izmir in May 1919, sanctioned by the Allies and accompanied by violence against the Turkish population, galvanized nationalist sentiment throughout Anatolia. As Greek forces pushed inland, the Turkish national movement found its crucial rallying cause that united diverse elements of Anatolian society. What followed was the Turkish War of Independence, a complex conflict with multiple dimensions. Nationalist forces fought against Greek, Armenian, and French troops, while diplomatically maneuvering to divide the Allies and gain support from the Soviet Union, which had its own reasons for opposing Western intervention in the region. The decisive phase came in the Greco-Turkish War that lasted from 1919 until September 1922. After initial Greek advances that nearly reached Ankara, Turkish nationalist forces under Mustafa Kemal launched a massive counteroffensive in August 1922 that recaptured Izmir and drove Greek forces from Anatolia entirely. A separate crisis over the neutral zone around the Turkish Straits was resolved through diplomacy, culminating in the Armistice of Mudros in October 1922. These nationalist victories rendered the Treaty of Sèvres effectively meaningless and forced the Allies to negotiate a new settlement. The end of an empire. Before new negotiations could begin at Lausanne, the Turkish Grand National Assembly took a momentous step on November 1st, 1922, formally abolishing the Ottoman Sultanate and separating the positions of Sultan and Caliph. Sultan Mehmed VI, the last Ottoman sovereign, left Istanbul aboard a British warship on November 17, 1922, bringing to an end a dynasty that had ruled for over 6 centuries. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed on July 24, 1923, after months of difficult negotiation, recognized the new Republic of Turkey as a fully independent state within borders similar to those of modern Turkey. The Treaty of Sèvres was superseded, and there would be no independent Armenia or Kurdistan, while Greek claims to Turkish territory were abandoned. In exchange, Turkey relinquished all claims to former Ottoman lands in the Middle East and accepted a massive population exchange with Greece that would fundamentally alter the demographic composition of both countries. With the Sultanate abolished and a new treaty secured, Mustafa Kemal and his allies moved to formalize the new political order. On October 29, 1923, the Turkish Grand National Assembly proclaimed the Republic of Turkey, with Ankara as its capital and Mustafa Kemal as its first president. The Caliphate, temporarily retained as a purely religious office, was abolished in March 1924, severing the last institutional link to the Ottoman past and eliminating any competing source of political legitimacy. Thus ended more than 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. An empire that had once dominated 3 continents, controlled the eastern Mediterranean, and shaped world affairs for generations, had contracted to a nation-state in Anatolia with a small European foothold. A living legacy. Yet from this seeming catastrophic collapse emerged a new Turkish national identity and state structure that would prove remarkably resilient in the decades ahead. The Ottoman Empire had succumbed to a combination of external pressures and internal contradictions, but its legacy would endure in countless ways. As the new Turkish flag rose over Ankara in 1923, the Ottoman Empire had formally ceased to exist. Its territories had been divided among successor states, its institutions dismantled, and its last sultan sent into exile. Yet the legacy of 600 years of Ottoman rule could not be so easily erased. The empire had left an indelible imprint on the lands it had governed, shaping everything from political borders to architectural styles, from culinary traditions to musical forms, from religious practices to cultural identities. This Ottoman inheritance would profoundly influence the development of successor states throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans, including the Turkish Republic that arose from the empire's heartland. The most immediate heir to the Ottoman legacy was the Republic of Turkey under Mustafa Kemal, who would soon be granted the surname Ataturk, meaning Father of the Turks. Having led the national resistance movement to victory, Ataturk embarked on a peaceful revolution, transforming what had been the Ottoman heartland into a modern nation-state based on Turkish national identity and secular governance. Ataturk's reforms were breathtaking in their scope and ambition. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, ending the Ottoman claim to religious leadership of the Islamic world. Religious schools were closed and education placed under state control, while a new civil code based on Swiss models granted women equal rights in matters of divorce and inheritance. Traditional headgear was discouraged, with the fez, once a symbol of Ottoman modernity, now banned as a relic of the imperial past. Most dramatically, in 1928, the Arabic script used for writing Turkish for centuries was replaced with a modified Latin alphabet, symbolically severing a key cultural link to the Ottoman era. These changes aimed to create a distinctly Turkish national identity separate from the Ottoman Islamic imperial legacy. State-sponsored historians promoted narratives that emphasized pre-Islamic Turkish history while downplaying the Ottoman period, which was often portrayed as an era of religious obscurantism that had prevented Turkish national development. Continuities and contradictions. Yet beneath this revolutionary rhetoric, important continuities persisted between the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic. Many institutions evolved directly from late Ottoman predecessors, while the parliamentary system drew on constitutional experiments from the empire's final decades. Even Ataturk's reforms, revolutionary as they appeared, continued the top-down modernization approach pioneered by Ottoman reformers from Selim III through the Young Turks. Most fundamentally, the human capital of the new republic came directly from Ottoman society, with Ataturk himself and most of his associates being products of Ottoman military and educational institutions. The relationship between the Turkish Republic and its Ottoman past would remain complex and evolving throughout the 20th century and beyond. During the early Republican period, official discourse minimized positive references to the Ottoman era, but by the 1980s, economic liberalization and political openings allowed more nuanced reassessments to emerge. Conservative and Islamist movements increasingly invoked aspects of Ottoman heritage as alternatives to Western-oriented secularism, while this Ottoman revival accelerated under governments that came to power in the early 21st century, with political leaders often employing Ottoman symbols and references to position modern Turkey as the natural heir to imperial grandeur. Regional legacies. Beyond Turkey's borders, other successor states developed their own complex relationships with the Ottoman legacy. In the Balkans, where Ottoman rule had lasted for centuries, national narratives often portrayed the imperial period as an era of foreign occupation that had interrupted natural development. Yet Ottoman influence remained visible everywhere, from architectural monuments to culinary traditions, musical forms to linguistic borrowings. Balkan Muslims, particularly in Bosnia, Albania, and North Macedonia, maintained more positive associations with the Ottoman era as a time when their communities had flourished under Islamic rule. In the Arab world, the Ottoman legacy underwent significant reassessment over time. Early Arab nationalist movements had defined themselves partly in opposition to Ottoman rule, portraying it as Turkish domination that had suppressed Arab cultural development. The arbitrary borders drawn by European powers after World War I, dividing formerly Ottoman Arab provinces into separate states, created new national identities that often denied Ottoman-era connections. By the late 20th century, however, some Arab intellectuals began re-evaluating the Ottoman period more positively, recognizing it as an era of relative regional integration and Islamic governance before European colonialism disrupted traditional patterns of development, physical and cultural inheritance. In physical terms, the Ottoman legacy remains highly visible throughout former imperial territories. Architectural masterpieces from imperial mosques in Istanbul to frontier fortresses in the Balkans, from desert caravanserais to urban market complexes, testify to Ottoman power and artistic achievement. Urban layouts in cities from Sarajevo to Damascus, Thessaloniki to Baghdad still reflect Ottoman planning principles, while restoration efforts have increased in recent decades as Ottoman monuments are recognized as valuable cultural heritage, regardless of contemporary political boundaries. The culinary legacy of the empire proved particularly durable, transcending political divisions that emerged after its collapse. Ottoman imperial cuisine, developed in palace kitchens that drew ingredients and techniques from throughout the empire, lives on in Turkish, Greek, Balkan, and Arab cooking traditions. Dishes like dolma, stuffed vegetables, börek, savory pastries, baklava, layered sweet pastry, and kofta, spiced meatballs, appear with regional variations throughout former Ottoman lands. Coffee culture, introduced to Europe through Ottoman territories, remains central to social life across the region. Linguistic influences similarly crossed political boundaries established after the empire's fall. Turkish loanwords persist in the languages of the Balkans, Arabic, and Greek, particularly in domains like administration, urban life, and cuisine, while the modern Turkish language still bears the imprint of its development within a multicultural empire. Enduring patterns. Religious developments in post-Ottoman territories reflected both continuities and changes from imperial patterns. The millet system's legacy of religious community autonomy influenced arrangements in many successor states, while religious institutions established during the Ottoman period continued to serve their communities, adapting to new political contexts. In geopolitical terms, many contemporary tensions in former Ottoman regions have roots in imperial administrative divisions, population movements, and the subsequent European-imposed boundaries. Issues ranging from Arab-Israeli conflicts to Kurdish nationalist aspirations, from Cyprus to Balkan ethnic tensions, can be traced partly to Ottoman-era developments and their disruption during and after World War I. The Ottoman imperial model itself continues to influence political imagination throughout the region. For some Islamist movements, the Ottoman Caliphate represents a historical example of Islamic governance encompassing diverse populations, while Pan-Arab nationalists sometimes portray the post-Ottoman fragmentation of Arab territories as artificial division requiring reunification. Scholarly understanding. Academic understanding of the Ottoman Empire has evolved significantly since its dissolution. Early Western scholarship often emphasized decline narratives and Orientalist stereotypes, while nationalist historians in successor states minimized positive aspects of Ottoman governance. By the late 20th century, however, more nuanced approaches emerged that recognized the empire's sophisticated administrative systems, pragmatic management of diversity, and significant cultural achievements. Access to Ottoman archives, improved translation capabilities, and interdisciplinary approaches have transformed scholarly understanding of imperial history. Popular culture has both reflected and shaped public perceptions of the Ottoman past through historical novels, films, and television series that have proliferated particularly in Turkey, but also internationally. These cultural products often reveal more about contemporary concerns than historical realities, but they have stimulated public interest in Ottoman history. Tourism has likewise contributed to new engagements with the Ottoman legacy, as sites from Topkapi Palace in Istanbul to the Starry, Most Bridge and Mostar have become major attractions, with restoration projects often emphasizing their Ottoman heritage, while culinary tourism celebrating Ottoman-influenced regional cuisines has grown significantly. Contemporary relevance. The contemporary relevance of Ottoman history extends far beyond the empire's former territories. The Ottoman experience of managing religious and ethnic diversity within a single political system offers potential insights for multicultural societies worldwide. While Ottoman diplomatic practices of balancing among competing powers resonate in discussions of multipolar international relations, the empire's ability to adapt and evolve over 6 centuries despite periodic crises demonstrates institutional resilience worth studying in an age of rapid global change. As Turkey approaches its Republican centenary, its relationship with the Ottoman past continues to evolve in complex ways. Rather than simple rejection or uncritical embrace of imperial heritage, contemporary Turkish society exhibits nuanced engagement with Ottoman history, selectively drawing on its symbols, achievements, and traditions while adapting them to modern national identity and contemporary challenges. This ambivalent relationship echoes across former Ottoman lands, where imperial legacies remain visible in everyday practices, even as official narratives sometimes minimize their significance. From the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, communities continue to negotiate their connections to a shared imperial past that transcended the national boundaries that now separate them. A bridge between worlds. The Ottoman Empire ultimately represents more than just a historical polity that rose, flourished, and declined. It embodies a distinctive approach to governance, culture, and identity that developed at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, offering lessons and insights that remain relevant today. Its capacity for adaptation and synthesis, its methods of managing diversity, and its cultural achievements continue to influence regional development and offer potential guidance for contemporary challenges. Though the empire itself has passed into history, its legacy lives on in the languages people speak, the foods they enjoy, the buildings they inhabit, the faiths they practice, and the identities they construct. In Istanbul, once Constantinople, and before that Byzantium, the physical embodiment of this legacy stands in monuments like the Hagia Sophia, which has served as Byzantine cathedral, Ottoman mosque, secular museum, and mosque again. Each transformation added layers of meaning rather than erasing what came before. exemplifying the palimpsest quality that characterizes the Ottoman legacy throughout its former domains. A century after the empire's dissolution, we can view Ottoman history with greater perspective than was possible for those who lived through its traumatic final years. Neither romanticizing it as a lost golden age, nor dismissing it as an era of oppression, does justice to its complexity and significance. The Ottoman Empire was a human institution with all the achievements and failures that implies. Its story deserves to be understood in full dimensions, not merely as a prelude to the nation-states that succeeded it, but as a significant chapter in world history, with continuing relevance for understanding how diverse societies can coexist and thrive together. The eternal rest. And so, dear listener, our journey through 6 centuries of Ottoman history draws gently to its close. Like a magnificent tapestry woven from countless threads of different colors and textures, the story of this great empire encompasses triumph and tragedy, wisdom and folly, the dreams of visionaries and the struggles of ordinary people trying to build better lives for themselves and their children. From a small band of Turkish horsemen following their leader's dream across the Anatolian plateau, to a vast empire stretching across 3 continents, from the humble wooden residence where Osman breathed his last to the marble splendor of Topkapı Palace, from the frontier fortress of Söğüt to the cosmopolitan streets of Istanbul. This has been a story of human ambition and achievement on a scale that few civilizations have ever matched. The empire's final transformation into the modern states of Turkey and the Middle East represents not an ending, but a metamorphosis, as the deep currents of Ottoman influence continue to flow beneath the surface of contemporary life. In the call to prayer that echoes across ancient skylines, in the architectural harmony of domes and minarets, in the flavors of dishes whose recipes have passed down through generations, in the rhythms of music that blend multiple traditions into something uniquely beautiful. The Ottoman legacy endures. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, perhaps you can imagine yourself walking through the quiet courtyards of an Ottoman mosque complex in the early morning hours, when dewdrops catch the first light of dawn and the fountains whisper their eternal songs, or strolling through the covered bazaars where merchants once called their wares in a dozen languages, where the mingled aromas of spices and coffee created their own form of poetry. Picture the great libraries where scholars bent over illuminated manuscripts by candlelight, adding their own discoveries to the accumulated wisdom of ages. Envision the garden courtyards where poets composed verses about love and beauty, where musicians played melodies that seemed to capture the very essence of human longing and joy. The Ottoman Empire sleeps now in the pages of history books and the stones of ancient monuments, but its spirit lives on in the enduring human aspiration to create societies where people of different backgrounds can live together in harmony, where beauty and learning are cherished, where justice and compassion guide the actions of rulers and ruled alike. In that sense, the Ottoman story is not truly finished, but continues to unfold wherever people work to build bridges between different worlds, to create institutions that serve all members of society, to preserve what is valuable from the past while adapting to the needs of the present and future. Rest well, gentle listener, and may your dreams be filled with the splendor and wisdom of ages past, the hope and possibility of days to come, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding how human beings, despite all their flaws and limitations, can sometimes create something truly magnificent that endures long after its creators have returned to dust. The empire may have ended, but the dream that inspired it, of a world where diversity is strength, where knowledge and beauty flourish, where people can live together in peace despite their differences, that dream remains as relevant today as it was 6 centuries ago, when a simple tribal leader gazed up at the stars and envisioned a tree whose branches would shade much of the known world. Sleep now, and let the gentle currents of history carry you toward your own dreams of what might be possible when human beings dare to imagine a better world and work together to make it real. The end.